Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the absolute edge of human endurance. A place so cold that your breath doesn't just fog. It literally crystallizes and falls to the ground with a sound locals call the whispering of the stars. We're talking about Yakutia, specifically the village of Oymyakon in eastern Siberia, where the thermometer hit -71.2 degrees Celsius -96 degrees Fahrenheit in 1924 and basically gave up trying. This is the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, where roughly 500 people wake up every morning, look at the frozen Hell's Cape outside, and think, yep, another Tuesday. You're standing in the village center right now, and it's mid-January. The sun, if you can even call it that, barely crests the horizon for about 3 hours before abandoning you to darkness again. Your eyelashes have frozen together twice already, and you've only been outside for 90 seconds. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe, like inhaling tiny shards of glass. Your lungs actually recoil from it, forcing you to breathe through a scarf that's already becoming a stiff, icy board against your face. Welcome to Oymyakon, where the name itself means unfrozen water, a cruel irony referring to a nearby thermal spring, basically the only thing in a 100-kilometer radius that isn't trying to kill you through temperature alone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you in California at midnight? London at 3 a.m.? I love seeing where in the world we're all gathering for these strange, sleepy journeys. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The village stretches before you like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie, except this apocalypse is just winter. Wooden houses hunker low against the permafrost, smoke streaming from chimneys in columns so straight and solid they look like they've been painted onto the sky. Cars line the streets with their engines running, always running, because if you turn them off, they'll never start again. The metal becomes so brittle in these temperatures that it can shatter like glass. People have lost fingers trying to change a tire at -60 degrees Celsius. The rubber explodes. The metal snaps. Your skin bonds instantly to any surface you touch. You watch a woman emerge from one of the houses, so bundled in fur that she looks more like an ambulatory pile of clothing than a human being. She's wearing reindeer skin boots that come up past her knees, wool leggings under insulated pants, a heavy coat made of Arctic fox fur, and a hat that covers everything but her eyes. Those eyes, they're different from what you're used to. The scara has a slight yellowish tint that comes from a diet heavy in fatty fish and reindeer meat, the body's adaptation to ensure enough vitamin D in a place where the sun is more of a rumor than a reality for most of the year. She nods at you, a gesture of acknowledgement that in this climate represents more effort than you'd think. Moving your neck when you're wearing 18 pounds of clothing isn't trivial. The thermometer mounted on the post office reads -67 degrees Celsius this morning. That's about -88 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you still thinking in Fahrenheit. At this temperature, weird things happen. Spit freezes before it hits the ground. If you toss boiling water into the air, it instantly vaporizes with a sound like cracking ice. Your breath doesn't just fog. It forms ice crystals that cascade downward, creating that whispering sound the locals know so well. Historians still argue whether the indigenous Yakut people originally named this phenomenon or whether it was the Russian settlers who arrived in the 17th century, but everyone agrees on the poetry of it. The stars whispering secrets to the frozen earth. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not if you're unprepared. The human body at -70 degrees Celsius is basically a ticking clock. Without proper clothing, you have maybe 10 minutes before severe frostbite sets in. 20 minutes and you're losing fingers, toes, maybe your nose. An hour and you're a corpse, frozen solid in whatever position you collapsed. But the people here don't just survive, they live. They raise children, fall in love, argue about politics, laugh at jokes, and somehow make this frozen nightmare into home. The cold here isn't just a temperature. It's a presence, a malevolent entity that permeates everything. Metal doorknobs have to be covered in leather or cloth because bare skin will stick to them instantly, leaving behind layers of tissue when you pull away. Windows are triple-paned and still accumulate frost on the inside. Food left outside doesn't spoil. It mummifies, freeze-dried by the relentless cold. A fish pulled from an ice fishing hole will be solid as a rock in 90 seconds. You could use it as a hammer and it wouldn't break. Let's talk numbers for a second because they're genuinely insane. The average January temperature in Oymyakon hovers around minus 50 degrees Celsius. That's the average. Some days are a balmy minus 40 degrees Celsius, and the locals walk around like it's spring. The record low, that minus 71.2 degrees Celsius from 1924, is disputed by some who claim an unofficial reading of minus 82 degrees Celsius was recorded in 1933 but not verified because the thermometer literally broke. The mercury froze inside it. Mercury freezes at minus 38.83 degrees Celsius, so they had to switch to alcohol-based thermometers, which worked down to about minus 114 degrees Celsius. Yakutia was basically daring the universe to see how cold it could get. You start walking toward what passes for the town's general store, and each step crunches through snow that's compressed into something closer to styrofoam. The cold has been here so long, pressed down with such intensity, that the snow doesn't behave like snow anymore. It squeaks under your boots with this distinctive sound that Arctic explorers have been writing about for centuries. It's the sound of ice crystals being crushed, their geometric structures collapsing under pressure. Poetic? Sure, but right now it's just loud, and every step announces your presence to the entire village. Inside your layers of clothing, you're sweating. That's the paradox of extreme cold. You have to wear so much insulation that any physical activity makes you overheat, but if you stop moving for too long, that sweat will freeze against your skin and kill you faster than anything else. The Yakut people learned this thousands of years ago, developing a sophisticated understanding of thermal regulation that modern scientists are still studying. Their traditional clothing uses reindeer fur specifically because the hollow hair fibers trap air while wicking moisture away from the body. It's basically Gore-Tex, except invented around 500 CE by people who had never heard of polymers. A truck rumbles past, moving at maybe 15 kilometers per hour. Speed is dangerous here, the tires are hard as concrete, and the suspension is brittle. Drive too fast and something will shatter. The truck's exhaust creates a cloud so thick you could almost walk on it, ice crystals forming instantly in the carbon dioxide plume. The driver keeps his window cracked despite the cold because otherwise the windshield will fog and freeze on the inside, and scraping ice while you're driving is generally frowned upon. Even in Yakutia, you reach the store and the door is built like an airlock. There's a tiny vestibule between the outside and the main store, and both doors are insulated with layers of felt and fur. You can't open both doors at the same time, it's literally against building code. The temperature differential between outside and inside is often over 90 degrees Celsius, and if you create a direct channel between them, the cold will rush in like water and wreck everything. Frozen pipes, shattered glass, and a room full of very angry shoppers who now have to deal with ice forming on the apples. Inside, the store is, well, it's exactly what you'd expect and also completely bizarre. Fresh vegetables are displayed like jewels because they cost roughly the same. Everything has to be flown in or driven up on the winter ice roads, those temporary highways that exist only when rivers freeze solid enough to support trucks. A head of lettuce costs about $8. Tomatoes are a luxury item, but frozen fish? Stacked like cordwood and cheaper than bottled water. Reindeer meat hangs from hooks in sections that would make a butcher in Nebraska weep. Entire legs, ribs, organs you can't even identify. This is the local crop, harvested from herds that somehow survive on lichen and spite. The cashier is a woman in her 60s, wearing a sweater indoors because even inside, even with the heaters running constantly, the temperature struggles to get above 15 degrees Celsius. She's missing part of her left ear, frostbite from her 20s. She'll tell you if you ask, though most people here don't ask because everyone has scars. She rings up your purchases on a cash register that's been modified with heating elements because normal electronics fail at these temperatures. Batteries die, LCD screens crack, computers hallucinate. The modern world has to be coaxed and tricked into functioning here. American? She asks in Russian, which you miraculously understand because this is a bedtime story and we're not going to waste time on language barriers. You nod and she laughs. You picked a good week. It's warm. Warm. It's minus 67 degrees Celsius outside. But she's not being sarcastic. She's being literal. 2 weeks ago, it was minus 71 degrees Celsius. And last winter, there were 4 straight days of minus 73 degrees Celsius when even the schools closed. The Yakutian education system has a fascinating temperature policy. Elementary schools close at minus 52 degrees Celsius, middle schools at minus 56 degrees Celsius, and high schools at minus 58 degrees Celsius. Below that, it's considered unsafe for children to walk to school, even bundled up, even for the 10 minutes it might take. But high schoolers? They're basically considered tough enough to handle anything short of minus 60 degrees Celsius. Character building, Siberian style. You leave the store with your purchases, mostly just snacks because you're not actually setting up a household here, just trying to understand what that would mean, and the cold hits you again like a physical slap. Your eyes water immediately, and those tears freeze on your cheeks, creating tiny rivulets of ice that pull at your skin. You're learning that cold at this intensity has texture, has weight. It's not absence of heat. It's presence of something else, something hostile and ancient. A group of children runs past, laughing, playing some game that involves throwing snowballs at a target drawn on the side of a shed. They're bundled up like everyone else, but they're moving with the unself-conscious energy of kids everywhere. One of them trips and faceplants into the snow, and for a second your heart stops. Exposed skin on snow at minus 67 degrees Celsius is a medical emergency. But the kid pops up, still laughing, because his face never actually touched anything. The layers of scarf and hat protected him. These children have been training for this climate since birth. They know instinctively what you're still learning intellectually. Respect the cold or it will kill you, but don't fear it or you'll never leave your house. The sun is starting its brief arc toward the horizon now, and the light it produces is thin and watery, almost apologetic. It illuminates the village in shades of blue and white and gray, with the orange glow of windows providing the only warm colors in the entire landscape. Smoke from heating stoves rises from every building, creating a haze that hangs over everything. The smell is with smoke and diesel and something else, the distinctive scent of extreme cold itself, which smells like metal and electricity and the inside of a freezer. You're headed toward the house where you'll be staying. A small wooden structure painted a faded blue, standing on stilts like every other building in town. The stilts aren't decorative, they're essential. The buildings are heated, and heat conducts into the ground, and the ground here is permafrost, permanently frozen soil that's been frozen for thousands of years. If you build directly on it, your warm house will melt the permafrost beneath it, and the building will sink, slowly and then catastrophically, until it collapses into the muddy pit it created. So instead, you build on stilts, allowing air to circulate underneath, keeping the permafrost frozen, maintaining the delicate balance that allows humans to exist here at all. Your host is named Dmitri, a man in his 40s who works as a mechanic, one of the most essential jobs in a place where vehicles are literally life support systems. He greets you at the door with a massive grin and a grip that could crack walnuts. Inside, his house is almost too warm, heated by a wood stove that's burning continuously. The walls are thick, not just wood, but layers of wood and insulation and more wood, creating barriers against the cold that would make a medieval castle builder nod in approval. "You sleep there," he says, pointing to what looks like a chair in the corner. Not a bed, a chair. A high-backed wooden chair with cushions and blankets piled on it. And that's when you understand. This is where the Real story begins. The reason you came here, the thing that makes Yakutian survival so uniquely strange. In the coldest inhabited place on Earth, people don't always sleep lying down. They sleep sitting up, back straight, bodies upright through the long Arctic night. The reason, as you're about to learn, has to do with blood circulation, with physics, with centuries of accumulated survival wisdom, and with the simple fact that at minus 70 degrees Celsius, your body's relationship with gravity becomes a matter of life and death. But that's a story for the next part of our journey. For now, you're just standing in Dimitri's overheated living room, staring at that chair, wondering how you ended up here and what the morning will bring. Spoiler alert. Numb legs and a profound respect for anyone who calls this place home. Dimitri sees your confusion about the chair and chuckles, a deep rumbling sound that makes his considerable belly shake beneath his wool sweater. You think we're crazy, yes? Everyone does at first. He pours you tea from a samovar that's been bubbling away in the corner, steam rising in visible curls even in the warm interior. The tea is black and strong enough to strip paint, sweetened with spoonfuls of honey from bees that somehow survive the Yakutian summer. A brief, almost tropical 2 months when temperatures can actually hit 30 degrees Celsius and the same landscape that's trying to murder you in winter becomes a boggy, mosquito-infested swamp trying to murder you in completely different ways. Nature is versatile like that. But why? Why would anyone choose to live here? That's the question you're asking now, the question every visitor asks. The question that has a dozen answers depending on who's telling the story. The simplest answer is, they didn't choose. Not really. Not at first. This land chose them, or more accurately, this land was the only option left when everything else was taken. The Yakut people, who call themselves Saka, arrived in this region around the 13th or 14th century, pushed north from the warmer steppes around Lake Baikal by stronger tribes and expanding empires. Historians still argue whether they were fleeing the Mongol invasions or were themselves part of the Mongol expansion. Splinter groups who kept moving north when everyone else stopped at, "This seems cold enough." Imagine being the guy in your tribe who said, "You know what? Let's keep going. I bet it gets even colder if we walk another 1,000 kilometers." That guy would not be popular at parties. They were horse and cattle people originally, herders who followed their animals across grasslands, living in felt tents and moving with the seasons. Then they hit Yakutia, where winter lasts 9 months and horses need to be stabled or they'll literally freeze to death standing up. So they adapted. They learned reindeer herding from the indigenous Evenki and Yukagir peoples who were already here, scratching out existence in an environment that makes Antarctica look welcoming. They developed new technologies, new clothing, new ways of building, new everything. The anthropological term for this is cultural adaptation under extreme environmental pressure. But really it's just figure it out or die. You sip your tea and listen as Dmitry explains, his Russian punctuated with Yakut words that you're starting to pick up through context and repetition. The Saka developed a semi-nomadic lifestyle that was unique to this region. They'd move their cattle and horses to summer pastures when the brief warmth arrived, then retreat to permanent winter settlements where they could survive the cold in structures designed for it. These weren't the felt yurts of their ancestors. These were balagans, elaborate wooden houses built low to the ground with turf walls and tiny windows, designed to trap every possible molecule of heat. "My great-great-grandfather built a balagan," Dmitry says, pulling out a photograph so old it's more sepia than image. It shows a structure that looks like a grass-covered mound with a door, smoke rising from a hole in the center. 40 people lived there in winter. 40 people, their heat keeping everyone alive. You sleep apart, you freeze. This communal living wasn't just cultural preference, it was thermal physics. A single human body generates about 100 watts of heat, roughly the same as an incandescent light bulb. Not much when it's minus 70 degrees Celsius outside. But 40 human bodies? That's 4,000 watts. Enough to keep a small structure survivably warm even when the world outside is actively hostile to biological life. The old balagans were essentially human furnaces. Everyone huddled together, body heat recycling and accumulating, creating a microclimate that made survival possible. But survival isn't the same as thriving. And here's where the story gets interesting. The Saka didn't just survive. They built a culture, a language, an entire civilization in the least hospitable environment humans have ever permanently inhabited. They developed epic poetry cycles that could take days to recite, stories of heroes and spirits, and the eternal battle between warmth and cold. They created intricate silver jewelry using techniques that required precise temperature control in a place where temperature was the enemy. They bred a distinct variety of horse, the Yakutian horse, that grows a winter coat so thick it looks like a fuzzy mammoth, and can survive grazing in temperatures that would kill Arabian stallions in minutes. The Russians arrived in the 1630s, Cossack explorers pushing eastward in search of fur and glory and whatever else lay beyond the next frozen river. They found the Saka and thought, perfect, someone to extract tribute from. The Yasak system began. Mandatory tribute in furs paid to the Russian crown, enforced by Cossacks with guns who had absolutely no interest in hearing about how hard it was to trap sable when your fingers kept falling off from frostbite. They built ostrogs, Dmitry continues, meaning the wooden forts the Russians erected across Siberia, made the local people bring furs or else. My ancestor, he was one of the, what do you call it, the important men? Chief? He refused. They sent him to an even colder place as punishment. He laughs at this. What's colder than here? They found somewhere. Always somewhere worse. The Russian colonization of Yakutia is one of those historical chapters that doesn't make it into many textbooks, probably because it's so relentlessly grim. Indigenous populations were decimated by disease, forced labor, and outright violence. Smallpox swept through communities that had no immunity, killing upwards of 70% of some villages. The survivors were integrated into the Russian Empire whether they wanted to be or not, their traditional lands claimed by the Tsar, their children forced into Russian schools, their shamanic traditions suppressed by Orthodox missionaries who arrived with icons and absolute certainty that their god was stronger than the Saka spirits. But here's the thing about extreme environments: they don't care about empires. The Russians could claim Yakutia on a map, could build their forts and churches, could demand tribute and obedience. But they couldn't change the fundamental reality of minus 70 degrees Celsius winters. They had to learn from the Saka or die. So you got this weird cultural synthesis where Russian exiles, because of course the Tsar sent political prisoners here, if you wanted to make someone suffer, Yakutia was basically a ready-made gulag, adopted Saka clothing, Saka building techniques, Saka survival wisdom, while simultaneously maintaining their Russian identity and Orthodox faith. The 19th century brought a new wave of settlers, old believers, religious dissidents who rejected reforms to the Russian Orthodox Church and fled to the furthest margins of the empire to practice their faith unmolested. They looked at Yakutia and thought, perfect, somewhere so miserable that nobody will bother us. They established villages, built churches, and added their own traditions to the strange cultural stew developing in the permafrost. Some historians argue that the old believers preserved medieval Russian traditions more faithfully than communities that remained in European Russia, because their isolation meant cultural changes never reached them. Others point out that isolation also meant inbreeding and genetic bottlenecks, so maybe the preservation came at a cost. You're learning that Yakutia isn't one story. It's layers of stories, cultures stacked on top of each other like geological strata, each one adapting to the cold in their own way but all fundamentally shaped by it. The Saka, the Russians, the old believers, the indigenous Evenki and Yukagir, the Soviet-era settlers, the modern adventurers and researchers, all of them answering the same basic question. How do you live where humans aren't supposed to? The Soviet period added another layer. Stalin looked at Yakutia and saw two things: natural resources and a convenient dumping ground for political undesirables. Gold deposits, diamond mines, tin, tungsten, all buried in the permafrost, all requiring massive labor to extract. The gulags expanded across Siberia, and Yakutia got its share. Prisoners built roads, mined diamonds, died in quantities that the Soviet government never bothered to count accurately. Historians still argue whether it was hundreds of thousands or millions who perished in the Siberian camps, and the truth is probably we'll never know because the records were destroyed or never existed in the first place. My wife's grandfather, Dmitri says quietly, he was sent here in 1947, political prisoner. They gave him number, not name. He mined gold until 1956. Then they released him but said he couldn't leave. So he stayed, met my wife's grandmother, had children, built a life. He shrugs. Where else would he go? This was home now. That pattern repeated thousands of times. Political prisoners served their sentences, got released, and discovered they had no way to return to their former lives. Their cities had moved on. Their families had disowned them out of self-preservation. Their careers were destroyed. So they stayed in Yakutia, married locals or other exiles, and became part of the strange tapestry of people who call this place home. The Soviet government also brought modernization, for whatever that's worth. They built power plants, paved some roads. Sort of pavement in permafrost is an engineering nightmare involving constant maintenance and creative use of insulation, established schools and hospitals, and generally tried to drag Yakutia into the 20th century. They also tried to suppress Saka language and culture because homogenization was the Soviet way. It didn't entirely work. Languages are resilient when communities are tight-knit, but it left scars. Many Saka people Dmitri's age speak Russian more fluently than their native language, a quiet cultural genocide that happened through schools and bureaucracy rather than overt violence. Modern Yakutia is officially the Saka Republic, a constituent part of the Russian Federation with a degree of autonomy. It's the largest subnational territory in the world, bigger than India, mostly empty, populated by fewer than 1 million people scattered across an area of 3.1 million square kilometers. The capital, Yakutsk, is a proper city of nearly 300,000 people, with universities and theaters and traffic jams and all the trappings of modern civilization, just placed somewhere that modern civilization was never meant to exist. But Oymyakon isn't Yakutsk. This village exists because reindeer herding still exists, because some people prefer the traditional life, because the Soviet government established it as a permanent settlement when they were forcing nomads to settle down, easier to govern people who stay in one place, and because at a certain point, leaving becomes harder than staying. The people here are a mix: ethnic Sakha, ethnic Russians, mixed families, a few Evenki, and the occasional mad researcher or photographer who shows up to document the extreme climate and sometimes never leaves. Why do people stay now? You ask, Dmitry, because that's the real question. In the 13th century, fine, you were fleeing Mongols. In the 17th century, okay, the Russians made you. In the Soviet era, sure, you weren't allowed to leave. But now? Russia is vast, but it has plenty of places that don't require sleeping upright to avoid frostbite. Dmitry considers this, sipping his tea. Outside, the temperature has dropped another degree. It's full dark now, and the cold intensifies when the sun abandons you completely. This is home, he finally says. Simple like that. My father born here, his father, his father. I know every person in village. I know the land. In Yakutsk, in Moscow, I would be nobody. Here, I am somebody. I am Dmitry who fixed the truck when everyone said it was impossible. I am Dmitry whose grandfather rode with the reindeer herds. I am Dmitry. He pauses. Also, I like the cold. Makes you feel alive, yes? Every day you wake up and the cold hasn't killed you yet. That is victory. There's something profound in that, something that doesn't translate well to cultures where the environment isn't actively trying to murder you. The daily victory of survival creates meaning. Every morning is an achievement. Every winter survived is a badge of honor. The harsh environment creates community because you literally cannot survive alone. You need your neighbors, your family, your tribe. In softer climates, you can be isolated, disconnected, alone in a crowd. Here you know everyone because you might need them to save your life tomorrow. The economic reality is grimmer, of course. Reindeer herding isn't exactly lucrative, and Oymyakon's remote location means jobs are scarce. The young people leave when they can, heading to Yakutsk or further west to find opportunities that don't involve potentially losing body parts to frostbite. The village is slowly shrinking, aging, becoming one of those places that exists more as an idea than as a viable community. Someday, maybe it will be abandoned entirely, returned to the permafrost from which it was carved. But not today. Today there are still 500 people who call this frozen nightmare home, who have adapted not just physically but culturally to life at -70°C. They've developed traditions around the cold, the annual Pole of Cold festival where they celebrate being the coldest inhabited place on Earth, because if you can't beat it, make it your identity. Where vendors sell stroganina, frozen raw fish sliced thin and eaten while still frozen, a delicacy that sounds horrifying and is actually delicious, and where children compete to see who can endure the cold longest in a survival competition that would make health and safety officers in most countries weep. You finish your tea and Dmitry shows you to your sleeping chair, piled with furs and blankets. The logic of upright sleeping is starting to make sense now, in this context of extreme adaptation, of cultures layering survival wisdom over generations. Nothing here is accidental. Every tradition, every technique, every seemingly strange behavior is the result of countless trials, countless errors, countless frozen corpses that taught the survivors what not to do. Tomorrow you'll learn the physiology, the blood flow science, the specific mechanics of why sleeping upright keeps you alive. But tonight, you're just beginning to understand the human side, the why beneath the how, the centuries of history that brought people to this frozen edge and convinced them to stay. Outside, the stars are brilliant in the clear Arctic air, so bright they seem artificial. The aurora is starting to dance on the northern horizon, green curtains of light rippling across the sky, caused by solar wind interacting with Earth's magnetosphere and not, as the old Sakha legends claim, the spirits of the dead playing ball with a walrus skull. Although, honestly, the scientific explanation isn't that much stranger than the spiritual one. You settle into your chair, testing its comfort, and Dimitri grins. In morning, your back will hurt. This is normal. Hurting means you are alive. Not hurting means frozen. Hurting is good. Siberian optimism, you're learning, is its own special category of outlook. Morning arrives with the subtlety of a freight train. Your back does indeed hurt. Dimitri wasn't lying about that. And your neck has developed a crick that suggests you spent the night at an angle the human spine was never meant to sustain. But you're warm, which in Yakutia is the only metric that truly matters. You slept, improbably, sitting mostly upright in that chair, your body heat trapped in the cocoon of furs and blankets, your circulation continuing its endless loop through vessels that never got cold enough to constrict dangerously. The science of why this works will come later. Right now, you're just grateful to be alive and moderately functional. Dimitri is already awake, stoking the fire in the wood stove, adding logs with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done this every morning for 40-some years. The house is warm, almost oppressively, so if you're used to central heating, hovering around 20 degrees Celsius, which represents a temperature differential of nearly 90 degrees from the world outside. The walls are doing their job, those multiple layers of wood and insulation creating a barrier between human survival and cosmic indifference. Come, Dimitri says, I show you why the house stands. He pulls on his outdoor gear with the methodical care of a deep-sea diver preparing for a descent, each layer serving a specific purpose. First the base layer of wool, then the insulated pants, then the heavy coat, then the hat and scarf and gloves and the reindeer skin boots that look ridiculous and probably weigh 5 kilograms each but are rated to keep your feet alive at temperatures that would make penguins reconsider their life choices. You bundle up in the borrowed gear Dimitri has provided, and even inside the house it takes nearly 10 minutes to get everything on properly. The zipper on your coat has been modified with a leather pull tab because metal zippers at minus 70 degrees Celsius become cold enough to cause frostbite on fingers. Every detail matters. Every oversight kills. Outside, the cold hits like a wall. It's minus 64 degrees Celsius this morning, a few degrees warmer than yesterday, and you can actually feel the difference. Warmer is relative when you're still in the realm of temperatures that shouldn't support human life, but your body recognizes the gradient. Your lungs don't seize quite as violently. Your eyes water slightly less. Progress Yakutian style. Dimitri leads you around the perimeter of his house, pointing at the stilts that elevate the entire structure about 1.5 meters off the ground. They're thick wooden posts, treated with something that makes them look almost black, sunk deep into the permafrost and anchored with concrete that was poured in summer when such things are possible. The space beneath the house is open to the air, allowing wind to circulate, maintaining the permafrost's frozen state despite the warm buildings sitting on top of it. You build on ground melts, house sinks. Dimitri explains, his breath forming that cascading ice crystal mist. My neighbor's cousin, he built garage without stilts. Thought he was smart, saving money. Summer came, garage sank, big crack in wall. Winter came, water in crack freeze and expand, whole thing fall down. He was not smart. The engineering principle is straightforward. Permafrost is only permanently frozen if you don't heat it. The active layer, the top meter or so of soil, thaws every summer and refreezes every winter, a cycle that's been happening for millennia. Below that, the permafrost extends down hundreds of meters in some places, soil and ice that has remained frozen since the Pleistocene epoch. That ancient ice holds the landscape together, provides the foundation for everything. Melt it and the ground becomes liquid mud, unstable, treacherous, capable of swallowing buildings whole. So every structure in Oymyakon stands on stilts, creating this strange landscape where houses float above the ground like wooden UFOs. Water pipes are above ground too. Massive insulated tubes running from house to house, heated by trace cables to prevent the water inside from freezing. The pipes look like someone's intestines were removed and stretched across the village, painted bright colors so people don't trip over them in the dark. There are no underground sewers because digging in permafrost is nearly impossible, and maintaining underground infrastructure at these temperatures would be an engineering nightmare that makes the Hoover Dam look like a weekend IKEA project. Instead, waste management is handled through a system that's medieval in its simplicity. Outhouses in summer, chemical toilets in winter, and honey wagon trucks that come around periodically to collect sewage in tanks that are then transported to treatment facilities in Yakutsk, 3 days' drive away when the roads are passable. It's not glamorous, but glamour freezes at about minus 30 degrees Celsius anyway. Dmitry shows you the foundation supports, pointing out the thermosiphons, vertical pipes filled with liquid ammonia that act as heat pumps, drawing warmth from the ground beneath the house and radiating it into the air above. They look like silver rockets sticking out of the earth at odd angles, each one topped with fins to maximize surface area. These aren't decorative. They're essential to keeping the permafrost frozen in summer when ambient temperatures might reach 30 degrees Celsius and the building's heat would otherwise melt the ground. Soviet engineers figured this out in the 1960s. Dmitry says with something like pride. Before that, houses would last maybe 20 years before sinking. Now, properly built, they last 50, 60 years. My house is from 1983. Still good. He knocks on one of the stilts with his gloved hand, producing a dull thud. Well, mostly good. The stilts on west side need replacing in next 5 years. But that is future problem. The entire village is built on this principle of aggressive cold maintenance. Roads are elevated on gravel pads to prevent the heat of summer sun from melting the permafrost beneath. The airport runway, yes, Oymyakon has an airport, because in winter the roads often become impassable and small planes are the only link to the outside world, is built on a thick layer of gravel and uses embedded cooling systems to keep the ground frozen year-round. Historians still argue whether the permafrost preservation techniques used here represent humanity's greatest triumph of living in harmony with an extreme environment or our greatest act of hubris in refusing to admit that maybe we shouldn't be here. You walk toward the center of the village, and the architecture tells stories. The older buildings are lower, squatter, with tiny windows and thick walls, built in the Soviet style that prioritized functionality over aesthetics. They're painted in faded colors, blues and greens and yellows that were probably cheerful once but now look tired, beaten down by decades of cold. Some have satellite dishes bolted to their sides, modern technology grafted onto Soviet-era construction, creating a temporal collision that's somehow perfectly Yakutian. The newer buildings, and there aren't many of them because construction here is expensive and complicated, use modern materials. Insulated metal siding, triple-pane windows with argon gas filling, advanced HVAC systems that recycle heat. But they still stand on stilts, still respect the fundamental law of permafrost architecture. Don't melt the ground or the ground will swallow you. There's a small museum in the village, housed in one of the older buildings, dedicated to the history of cold survival. Inside, and you have to go through another airlock-style double-door system to enter, there are displays of traditional Saka clothing, tools made from bone and antler, photographs from the early 20th century showing people who look simultaneously ancient and timeless. One exhibit shows the evolution of the Balagan, from the primitive earth-sheltered structures to the more sophisticated wooden houses to the modern buildings of today. What strikes you is how recent all of this is. The oldest photographs are from the 1920s. Before that, everything is oral history, stories passed down, archaeological evidence sparse because permafrost preserves some things and destroys others in ways archaeologists are still trying to understand. The Saka have been in Yakutia for maybe 700 years, a long time in human terms, but a blink in geological time. 700 winters. 700 cycles of temperatures that could kill you in minutes. 700 seasons of figuring out how to not die. The museum curator is an elderly woman named Valentina who speaks English with a British accent she learned from BBC radio broadcasts in the 1970s. She's delighted to have a visitor. Tourism in Oymyakon is minimal, mostly consisting of extreme weather enthusiasts and photographers chasing that perfect shot of frost-covered everything. She shows you artifacts with the reverence of someone handling sacred objects. A traditional Saka summer dress made of dyed leather, a shaman's drum covered in symbols that represented spirits and animals, a child's toy carved from mammoth ivory found in the permafrost. We build not just houses but systems, Valentina explains, gesturing at a diagram showing the layout of a traditional winter settlement. The Balagan at center, surrounded by structures for animals, storage pits dug into permafrost, natural freezer, you understand, and everything positioned to maximize sunlight in winter, minimize wind exposure. The positioning of buildings was science, even when the people didn't call it that. She's right. Modern architectural analysis of traditional Saka settlements reveals sophisticated understanding of solar orientation, wind dynamics, and thermal management. They built long before they had thermodynamics equations, but they understood the principles through observation and painful trial and error. Build your winter house facing south to catch maximum sunlight. Position your summer camp near water but on high ground to avoid the mosquito swarms. Store your food in permafrost cellars that maintain a constant -10 degrees Celsius year-round. The knowledge was empirical, accumulated across generations, written not in books but in survival rates. Valentina shows you the construction techniques of a traditional balagan, using a scale model that's intricate enough to be museum quality, which makes sense, given that it's in a museum. The walls were made from vertical logs packed with earth and turf for insulation, creating barriers up to a meter thick. The roof was layered. Wooden beams, then birch bark for waterproofing, then earth and turf, then snow in winter which provided additional insulation. Inside, sleeping platforms were built at different heights. The closer to the ceiling, the warmer the air, so the elderly and children slept high while healthy adults took the colder lower platforms. And the door, Valentina says, pointing, always opens inward. Always. This is law now, but it was tradition first. If door opens outward and snow piles up, you are trapped inside. If door opens inward, you can always escape. Also, inward opening door creates seal when wind pushes on it. Outward door would be pushed open by wind, letting cold in. Small detail, but small details keep you alive. You're beginning to understand that architecture in Yakutia isn't about style or statement. It's about survival mathematics. Every design choice is a calculation. Heat retention versus structural integrity, accessibility versus cold prevention, cost versus longevity. There's no room for purely aesthetic decisions when the environment will kill you for making mistakes. Modern Oymyakon buildings still follow many of these principles, just executed with different materials. Triple pane windows instead of small openings covered with fish bladder or scraped animal intestine. Yes, that was actually used. Translucent enough to let in light, tough enough to keep out wind. Electric heating instead of dung fires and body heat. But the core logic remains. Create a warm box in a cold universe and maintain the boundary between them with fanatical attention to detail. Valentina walks you through the evolution of heating systems, which is basically a history of desperation and innovation. First, there were open fires in the center of the balagan, smoke escaping through a hole in the roof, everyone living in a constant haze that probably caused respiratory problems but kept them from freezing. Then came clay and stone hearths that directed smoke better and radiated heat more efficiently. Russians brought brick stoves, huge structures that could heat a room for hours after the fire died down, thermal mass holding and releasing warmth. Modern homes use wood stoves, electric heaters, sometimes diesel generators, and every single one of them runs essentially continuously from September to May because letting your heat source go out for more than a few hours is flirting with disaster. My grandmother, Valentina says, she would sleep next to the stove in winter, not comfortable but safe. If the fire went out, she would wake from the cold before it became dangerous. This was her job, firekeeper. Now we have thermostats and alarms, but then you were the thermostat. You were the alarm. There's something both beautiful and horrifying about that. The idea that sleeping was a form of vigilance, that rest was conditional on your ability to wake when warmth failed. No such thing as deep sleep when deep sleep could mean death. The human body adapted, became sensitive to temperature changes, developed the ability to rouse at the first hint of cold penetration. Some researchers believe this chronic sleep disruption is one reason traditional Arctic peoples had lower life expectancies, though separating environmental stress from poor nutrition from disease exposure is basically impossible in historical populations. Outside the museum, the village's other buildings tell their own stories. The school is the newest structure, built in 2001 with Russian federal funds, designed by engineers who actually understood permafrost mechanics. It's a 2-story building, rare in Oymyakon, with a heated basement that's suspended above the permafrost by an elaborate system of stilts and thermosiphons. The heating system is redundant triple, 2 diesel boilers and an electric backup, because having the school heat fail when it's full of children would be a disaster of epic proportions. The health clinic is smaller, older, barely adequate but staffed by a doctor and 2 nurses who've learned to treat frostbite in ways that medical schools in temperate climates don't bother teaching. There's a small Orthodox church, painted cheerful yellow, its onion dome incongruous against the flat white landscape. A few shops, a cafe that serves food so heavy and caloric that it would horrify nutritionists but makes perfect sense when your body is burning 4,000 calories a day just maintaining core temperature. And everywhere, between the buildings, those elevated water pipes and electrical lines, creating a maze of infrastructure that's visible because burying it would be impossible. It gives the whole village an unfinished look, like construction is ongoing, like humanity hasn't quite managed to settle here permanently but is still trying, still fighting the cold for every meter of habitable space. Dmitri leads you to one final building, an old storage structure that's been partially collapsed for years. Nobody bothered to fix it because storage space is abundant. Anything you want to store just goes outside where it freezes and keeps indefinitely. But the ruin itself is instructive. You can see where the permafrost melted beneath it, the way the ground became liquid mud and swallowed the southern corner. You can see how the weight of the building, improperly distributed, created pressure points that accelerated the melting. You can see the end result of engineering failure in an environment that doesn't forgive mistakes. This is what happens when you don't respect the cold, Dmitri says, and there's no smugness in his voice, just matter-of-fact observation. The cold is not enemy. The cold is just cold. But you must respect it, understand it, work with it. Fight it and you lose. Accept it and you survive. That philosophy seems to underpin everything about Yakutian architecture and engineering. You don't conquer the cold. You accommodate it, design around it, create spaces where warmth can exist but never assume those spaces are permanent. The cold is always waiting, always patient, always ready to reclaim what you've temporarily taken. As you walk back toward Dmitri's house, your feet crunching on snow that squeaks with that distinctive Arctic sound, you realize that every building in this village is an act of defiance and submission simultaneously. Defiance. We will live here despite the cold. Submission. We will build according to the cold's rules. It's a paradox that somehow works, that has kept 500 people alive in a place where they shouldn't be. And tonight, you'll sleep in your chair again, upright and warm, inside a wooden box standing on stilts above frozen ground that's been frozen for 10,000 years. Somehow, that seems perfectly reasonable now. The daily rhythm of Oymyakon follows the cold, not the clock. You wake when you wake, early because sleeping upright doesn't exactly promote restful slumber, and the first task is always the same. Check if you're still alive. This sounds darkly humorous until you realize it's literally true. Dmitri told you about his uncle who had a heart attack in his sleep one winter night, and nobody discovered it until morning because everyone assumed he was just sleeping peacefully in his chair. The cold preserves bodies remarkably well, turns out. Death and sleep can look very similar when both involve sitting motionless in a chair wrapped in furs. But you're alive. Your back protests this fact loudly, and the morning routine begins. First, the windows. Every window in Dmitri's house is covered with frost on the inside, elaborate crystalline structures that have grown overnight despite the triple glazing and the continuous heating. This frost is actually useful. It's another layer of insulation, dead air trapped in the crystal matrix. But it also blocks what little daylight might exist. So Dmitri scrapes it off with a special wooden tool, collecting the frost in a bucket that he'll dump outside. The scraping creates this peculiar sound, like someone gently crushing potato chips, and reveals the world outside. Still dark, still frozen, still exactly what you expect. Next, the door. This is where things get interesting. The exterior door has frozen shut overnight. Moisture from inside the house has condensed around the seal and turned to ice, effectively welding the door to its frame. This happens every night. The solution is not to force it open. Broken doors at minus 65 degrees Celsius are life-threatening emergencies, but to carefully apply heat. A hairdryer, or in Dmitri's case, a small propane torch that he plays over the seal with the casual expertise of someone who's done this roughly 10,000 times. The ice melts, the seal releases, and the door opens. Except you still can't go outside, not directly. Remember the airlock system? The outer vestibule has its own door, and it's also frozen shut, and it also needs to be torched open. This double door system means escaping the house takes 15 minutes minimum. In an emergency, this could be fatal. But the alternative, a single door creating a direct connection between -65 degrees Celsius and +20 degrees Celsius, would let in so much cold air that pipes would freeze and burst within hours. So you accept the trade-off. Slow exit, preserved infrastructure. Dmitri finally gets both doors open, and the cold rushes in like a living thing, visible as a fog of condensation, angry at being excluded for the night. You step into the vestibule, close the inner door, then step outside, close the outer door. The temperature transition is brutal even through all your layers, from comfort to hostility in 3 seconds. Your first breath of outside air triggers a coughing fit because your bronchial tubes are contracting, your body's natural response to inhaling what's essentially poison at this temperature. The morning light, and it barely deserves that name, is a dim gray glow on the eastern horizon. It's 9:30 a.m. The sun won't actually appear for another hour, and when it does, it'll trace a sad little arc barely above the southern horizon before giving up and disappearing around 3 p.m. 6 hours of twilight masquerading as daylight. The rest is darkness. Dmitri's first task is checking his truck. It's been running all night, the engine idling continuously in the cold, exhaust creating a permanent cloud around the vehicle. You can't turn off vehicles here in winter, or rather, you can, but you'll never start them again without elaborate heating procedures involving blowtorches and several hours of frustration. So cars just run. All winter. 24 hours a day. The fuel consumption is staggering. Dmitri's truck burns through a tank of diesel every 4 days just sitting there idling. But diesel is cheaper than being stranded without transportation when the nearest mechanic is 3 days' drive away and the temperature is actively trying to kill you. He checks the oil level. The oil has the consistency of molasses. Tests the heater. Crucial. Driving without heat is a death sentence if you break down. And examines the tires. They're so rigid they're nearly square, creating a distinctive thump-thump-thump when you drive. Satisfied that his truck is still more or less functional, he moves on to the next item: water. Water in Oymyakon is complicated. The village has a central water plant that draws from a nearby spring. That unfrozen water the town is named after, kept liquid by geothermal activity far underground. The plant heats the water and pumps it through those elevated, insulated pipes to each house. But the system isn't pressurized like modern plumbing. It's gravity-fed and intermittent. Water flows for a few hours each morning and evening, and during those windows you fill every container you have. Buckets, pots, jerry cans, bathtubs. This is your water supply until the next flow period. Dmitri has a storage system that would make a doomsday prepper nod in approval. 8 large containers holding roughly 200 liters total, enough for drinking, cooking, and minimal washing for 2 people for several days. In summer, people bathe regularly. In winter, bathing is a luxury that uses too much water and heat, so it happens weekly, maybe twice a month for the truly dedicated to hygiene. You learn to embrace a certain level of grubbiness, accept that you're going to smell like with smoke and sweat and that everyone else does too, so it's fine. Toilets are another adventure. Dmitri's house has an indoor chemical toilet, a modern luxury, but it needs to be emptied regularly. The outhouse is 50 meters from the house, far enough that the smell doesn't reach the inhabited areas, close enough that you won't die of exposure walking to it. Using an outhouse at -65 degrees Celsius is an experience that defies description. You move fast. You don't linger. You develop efficiency that would impress time-motion study consultants. The world record for outhouse usage in Oymyakon is allegedly 43 seconds from door open to door close, set by a teenager in 2003, though historians still argue whether this time is accurate or has been inflated by local mythology. Breakfast is a serious affair because food is fuel and fuel is survival. Dmitri prepares a spread that would horrify cardiologists. Reindeer sausage fried in its own fat, thick slabs of black bread with butter, hard-boiled eggs, boiled yesterday and kept in their shells, which prevents them from freezing solid, a porridge made from millet and milk and more tea. The caloric density is insane. This breakfast probably contains 1,500 calories, but when your basal metabolic rate has increased by 30% just to maintain body temperature, you need every calorie you can get. The reindeer sausage is interesting. It's made from meat, fat, blood, and spices, packed into intestinal casings, then frozen immediately. The freezing happens so quickly that ice crystals don't have time to form large structures. so the texture remains good when thawed. This fast freeze technique predates modern flash freezing by centuries. The Saka figured it out through observation and experimentation, noticing that meat frozen quickly in severe cold tasted better than meat frozen slowly in moderate cold. While you eat, Dmitry explains the daily schedule. There isn't much work in winter. Reindeer herding is minimal because the herds are mostly self-sufficient once they've been moved to winter pastures. Some people still check on them weekly, making multi-day expeditions into the surrounding wilderness, but most of the village hunkers down and waits for spring. This creates a strange temporal experience where days blur together, each one identical. Wake, eat, maintain the house, eat, do small tasks, eat, sleep sitting up, repeat. In Soviet times, Dmitry says, there were more jobs. Processing plant for reindeer meat, administrative offices, school was bigger. Now many jobs gone. Government pays stipends for living in extreme climate zone. Extra money because conditions are harsh. But is not enough. Young people leave when they can. This is the slow death of remote settlements everywhere. Economic opportunity evaporates. Young people depart. The community ages and shrinks until it reaches a tipping point where maintenance becomes impossible and the whole thing collapses. Oymyakon isn't there yet, but you can see the trajectory. The school has 60 students, down from over 100 in the 1990s. Businesses close and don't reopen. Houses stand empty, their owners having moved to Yakutsk or Magadan or Moscow, anywhere that offers a future beyond freezing. After breakfast, Dmitry has maintenance work. One of the thermosiphons on his house's foundation isn't functioning properly, drawing less heat than it should, which could eventually lead to permafrost melting under that section. He needs to check it, possibly replace the ammonia charge, definitely clean the cooling fins. This is the kind of work that defines life here. Constant vigilance against entropy, against the cold's patient efforts to destroy everything you've built. You help him, which mostly means handing him tools and trying not to let your fingers go numb. He works with the calm efficiency of someone who's done this many times, explaining each step as he goes. The thermosiphon is essentially a passive heat pump. Ammonia inside vaporizes when it absorbs heat from the ground, rises to the cooling fins at the top, condenses back to liquid when it releases that heat to the air, then flows back down. No moving parts, no electricity required, just physics working 24/7 to keep the permafrost frozen. Soviet engineers were brilliant with this, Dmitry says, and there's genuine admiration in his voice. They understood that simple systems work better in extreme environments. Complicated systems break. He taps the thermosiphon. This has been working since 1983, 42 years. Only maintenance is cleaning fins and checking ammonia level. You try to get 42 years from computer or electric pump. He laughs. Not possible. The work takes 2 hours. Your hands are numb despite 3 layers of gloves. Your feet are cold even in the reindeer skin boots. Your face is covered except for your eyes, and your eyelashes keep freezing together. But Dmitry works methodically, checking connections, testing pressures, making small adjustments until he's satisfied. Then you both retreat inside for tea and the slow process of warming up, which involves sitting near the stove and letting sensation return to your extremities in waves of pins and needles that are almost painful. Lunch is more reindeer. This time a stew with potatoes and carrots that were flown in from Yakutsk last month and have been carefully rationed since. Fresh vegetables are rare enough to be treated like treasure. The stew is thick and hot and probably contains enough sodium to give a nutritionist a stroke, but it's delicious in the way that only food eaten in extreme cold can be. Every calorie feels necessary, every bite of warmth appreciated. After lunch, Dmitry suggests visiting his neighbor Yakov, who's working on a project that might interest you. Yakov is building a traditional balagan, a replica of the old-style dwelling, because the village wants to have one for tourists, the 3 tourists per year who visit, and also because Yakov is retired and needs something to do or he'll go crazy from boredom. The walk to Yakov's house is 200 meters but takes 15 minutes because you don't rush in this cold. Rushing means sweating. Sweating means moisture in your clothes. Moisture means thermal conductivity increases. Thermal conductivity means you freeze faster. So you walk slowly, deliberately, breathing shallowly through your scarf. Yakov is 71 years old, looks about 90, and has the energy of someone half his age. He's missing 3 fingers on his left hand, frostbite from his youth, before he learned proper cold management, and speaks Russian with such a thick Saka accent that even Dmitri sometimes asks him to repeat things. His Balagan project is taking shape in his yard. A circular wooden frame about 8 meters in diameter, walls going up layer by layer, earth and turf packed between logs for insulation. Traditional Balagan, Yakov explains, gesturing at his construction with his remaining fingers. Held 40, 50 people in winter, everyone together, body heat combining. You sleep around the edges, elders and children on raised platforms near ceiling where warm air rises, healthy adults on floor. Center is fire pit with smoke hole above. Smoke goes out, heat stays in, mostly. Everyone coughs from smoke, but everyone alive from warmth. He shows you the construction technique, which is surprisingly sophisticated. The logs are notched and fitted together without nails or screws, creating interlocking joints that flex with temperature changes but don't separate. The earth and turf insulation is applied wet, as wet as anything gets at minus 65 degrees Celsius, which means basically damp, then allowed to freeze solid, creating a thermal barrier that's remarkably effective. The roof structure uses bent saplings to create a dome, distributing weight evenly, preventing snow accumulation from crushing the whole thing. My grandfather lived in Balagan until 1956, Yakov says. Soviet government said no more, made everyone move to permanent houses. Said it was primitive, backward. Maybe was primitive, but nobody froze to death in Balagan. New houses, first years, many people froze because didn't understand heating, didn't understand building maintenance. Progress killed more people than tradition. This is the tension you keep encountering in Yakutia. Modernity versus tradition, each with advantages and costs. Modern houses are more comfortable, more private, arguably more hygienic. But they're also more fragile, more dependent on infrastructure that can fail, more complicated to maintain. A Balagan required constant attention but could be built with local materials and traditional knowledge. A modern house requires specialized materials, expert knowledge, continuous fuel supply. Neither system is perfect. Both require accepting trade-offs. Yakov invites you inside his actual house for tea. Everything in Yakutia revolves around tea. And his home is a museum of Soviet-era memorabilia. Propaganda posters, photographs of young men in Red Army uniforms, medals from various campaigns, a portrait of Lenin looking stern and slightly frostbitten. Yakov saw active service in the 1970s, was stationed in East Germany, then returned to Oymyakon because, as he puts it, Germany was too warm, made me soft. Needed to come home. Remember what cold feels like. He tells stories about the old days when the village had 800 people, when there were dances every weekend, when young people stayed instead of leaving. There's nostalgia in his voice, but also acceptance. Things change. Villages shrink. The world moves on. You can grieve for it or you can accept it, and Yakov seems to have chosen acceptance tinged with just enough grief to stay human. As evening approaches, which means 3 p.m. when the sun gives up, you and Dmitri walk back home. The temperature has dropped to minus 68 degrees Celsius, cold enough that your breath creates that whispering stars effect, ice crystals cascading downward with each exhalation. The village is settling into night mode. Lights appearing in windows, smoke intensifying from chimneys, the hum of generators increasing as people fire up electric heaters to supplement their wood stoves. Dinner is fish tonight. Frozen omel from Lake Baikal, purchased months ago, stored outside where it remains perfectly preserved. Dmitri thaws it slightly over the stove, then serves it as stroganina. Thin slices of partially frozen fish eaten with salt and bread. It's the texture of good sashimi but colder, and the flavor is clean and delicate in a way that cooked fish never quite achieves. You eat until you're full, then eat more because tomorrow the temperature might drop further and you'll need the calories. After dinner, Dmitri shows you how to prepare the sleeping chair properly. Furs arranged to create air pockets. Dead air is the best insulator. Blankets layered to trap heat while allowing moisture to escape, positioning that supports your spine while keeping your head elevated. Legs slightly bent to maintain circulation. It's more complicated than just sitting down. A whole ritual of preparation that can mean the difference between comfortable sleep and waking up with numbness or worse. You will dream strange dreams, Dmitri warns. Everyone does first few nights. Your brain doesn't understand sleeping sitting up. It sends confused signals. You might dream you're falling or flying or underwater. This is normal. Ignore it. The dreams will stop after a week or so. Great. Something to look forward to along with the chronic back pain and the possibility of catastrophic frostbite. But you settle into your chair, arranging the furs and blankets according to Dimitri's instructions, and you have to admit, it's not entirely terrible. The upright position keeps you alert enough to notice if something goes wrong. Fire dying, cold penetrating, catastrophic building failure, but relaxed enough to actually sleep. Your circulation continues unimpeded, blood flowing freely through vessels that aren't compressed by lying down. Your breathing remains clear because you're not flat on your back. Outside, the temperature continues its slow descent toward the night's minimum, probably minus 72 degrees Celsius or worse. Inside, the wood stove radiates heat, the walls hold back the cold, and you drift toward something approximating sleep. The daily routine in Oymyakon is simple. Wake up alive, stay alive, go to sleep hoping to wake up alive again. Everything else is details. 3 days into your Oymyakon experience, your body starts doing weird things. You notice it first in the morning when you stand up from the sleeping chair and your vision briefly goes dark. A head rush that suggests your blood pressure has been recalibrating overnight. Your fingers are slightly swollen, puffier than normal, which Dmitri assures you is perfectly natural. Your body is shunting blood toward your core and extremities in new patterns, trying to maintain warmth in tissues that are constantly under thermal siege. Your appetite has become ravenous. You could eat an entire reindeer and still feel hungry an hour later. Welcome to extreme cold physiology, where your body becomes a furnace running overtime and normal biological rules take a vacation. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside you right now, because it's genuinely fascinating in a wow, the human body is barely holding it together kind of way. Your basal metabolic rate, the energy you burn just existing, has increased by roughly 30 to 40% since you arrived. In temperate climates, an average adult might burn 1,800 calories per day doing nothing. Here, you're burning closer to 2,500 just sitting still, and that's before you factor in any actual activity. Your body is working constantly, every cell burning fuel to maintain the 37 degrees Celsius core temperature that keeps enzymes functioning and prevents your brain from shutting down. Thermogenesis is happening at multiple levels. First, there's shivering thermogenesis, your muscles contracting rapidly to generate heat through friction. You've probably noticed you shiver a lot here, even when you feel warm. That's your body's crude but effective method of heat generation, burning glucose and fat to keep your temperature stable. Each shiver episode can increase heat production by 400 to 600%, but it's metabolically expensive and exhausting, which is why people in Arctic climates eat so much fatty food. They need the caloric density to fuel the constant shivering. But there's also non-shivering thermogenesis, which is more interesting. Your brown adipose tissue, brown fat, concentrated around your neck and shoulders and spine, is activating like crazy. Unlike white fat, which stores energy, brown fat burns energy specifically to produce heat. It's packed with mitochondria that can uncouple the normal ATP production process, essentially burning fuel without doing useful work, converting it directly to heat. Babies have lots of brown fat because they can't shiver effectively. Adults lose most of it, but prolonged cold exposure can actually increase brown fat deposits. Some researchers believe traditional Arctic peoples have higher concentrations of active brown fat than populations from warmer climates, though historians still argue whether this is genetic adaptation or physiological response to environment. Your cardiovascular system is going through changes too. Blood vessels in your extremities are constantly constricting and dilating in a pattern called cold-induced vasodilation, CIVD. When your fingers or toes get too cold, blood vessels constrict to preserve core temperature. This is why extremities go numb first. But if they stay constricted too long, tissue damage occurs from lack of oxygen. So periodically, your body forces vasodilation, flooding the extremities with warm blood temporarily before constricting again. This creates that painful tingling sensation you get when your fingers warm up. It's not the cold causing pain, it's the returning blood flow. Some populations show enhanced CIVD responses. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia, the Inuit of the Arctic, the Yakut, all show evidence of more efficient cold adaptation compared to people from temperate zones. Whether this is genetic or developmental, your body adapting if you're raised in cold, is still debated, but the effect is real. Native Yakutians can maintain hand temperature and dexterity in conditions that would leave a tropical resident helpless with frostbite. Your respiratory system is also struggling in interesting ways. Air at -70 degrees Celsius is so cold that breathing it directly would damage your lungs. The respiratory tract has to warm and humidify incoming air before it reaches the alveoli. And at these temperatures, that's a massive heat loss. You're breathing through a scarf, which helps. It traps some exhaled moisture and heat, pre-warming the next breath. But even so, you're losing probably 10 to 15% of your total heat production just through breathing. In extreme cold, people can develop frost lung, inflammation of the bronchial tissues from repeated cold exposure, which causes a chronic cough that can last weeks after returning to warmer climates. Your blood itself is changing. The viscosity increases slightly as temperatures drop, making your heart work harder to pump it through vessels. Your red blood cell count increases over days to weeks of cold exposure, your body trying to maximize oxygen transport efficiency. Your white blood cell count might temporarily drop, which is why people in extreme cold environments are often more susceptible to infections. The immune system is being partially suppressed to conserve energy for more immediately critical functions like not freezing to death. Hormones are flooding your system in unusual patterns. Thyroid hormone production increases to boost metabolism. Cortisol levels rise, because from your body's perspective, being at -70 degrees Celsius is a stress response situation 24/7. Adrenaline comes in waves, particularly when you first step outside, priming your body for fight or flight, though in this case it's more survive or freeze. Over time, chronic elevation of stress hormones can cause problems, fatigue, immune suppression, mood changes, which is one reason long-term residents of extreme cold climates show higher rates of certain health issues. Now, let's get to the sleeping upright question, because this is where physiology gets really interesting. When you lie flat, gravity distributes blood relatively evenly throughout your body. Your heart doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood to your brain because there's no significant elevation difference. This is normal, this is fine, this is how humans have been sleeping for hundreds of thousands of years. But in extreme cold, lying flat creates a problem. Blood pools in your extremities, your legs and feet, furthest from your core, receive blood that's traveling through tissue exposed to cold. Even with blankets and insulation, heat is constantly being lost through radiation, conduction, and convection. Blood flowing to your feet cools down. Cool blood returns to your heart. Your heart has to work harder to rewarm it. The cycle continues, and over hours of sleep, your extremities get progressively colder. In moderate cold, this is uncomfortable but not dangerous. In -70 degrees Celsius conditions, even inside a heated house, the extremity cooling can reach dangerous levels. Frostbite becomes a real risk even in your bed, especially if blankets shift during sleep, exposing a foot or hand. There are documented cases of people losing toes to frostbite while sleeping in their own beds in Yakutian winters, usually due to inadequate bedding or heating failures. Sleeping upright changes the equation. When you're sitting, gravity helps blood return from your legs to your core. The venous return is assisted by gravity rather than fighting it. Your heart doesn't have to pump as hard to circulate blood through your lower extremities. The blood that does reach your feet stays there for less time before returning upward. This means less heat loss per circulation cycle, warmer extremities overall, and reduced frostbite risk. There's also a respiratory component. Sleeping upright keeps your airways more open, reducing the risk of sleep apnea, which is already elevated in cold conditions due to increased mucus production and airway inflammation. Better breathing means better oxygenation, means better temperature regulation, means better survival. And there's a vigilance factor. Remember what Dmitri said about his grandmother sleeping next to the stove, half aware even while sleeping? Sleeping upright maintains a higher baseline level of consciousness. You don't enter as deep a sleep stage, which sounds bad but is actually adaptive in a dangerous environment. You're more likely to wake if the fire dies, if the temperature drops, if something goes wrong. In evolutionary terms, Sleeping deeply in a hostile environment gets you killed. Sleeping lightly keeps you alive. The practice of sleeping upright isn't unique to Yakutia, by the way. Historical records show it was common in medieval Europe, particularly among peasants in cold climates. They'd sleep sitting up in chairs or propped against walls, often in communal sleeping arrangements. The reasons were partly cultural, partly practical. Beds were expensive, space was limited, but also physiological. People noticed that sleeping upright in cold weather kept them warmer, even if they didn't understand the circulatory mechanics behind it. Vikings allegedly slept sitting up on sea voyages, propped against the ship's sides, for similar reasons. It kept them warmer and more alert to dangers. Sailors in the Age of Exploration reported that crew members would sleep in hammocks in a semi-upright position during cold Atlantic crossings. Whether this was conscious temperature management or just making do with cramped conditions is unclear, but the effect was the same. Better circulation, warmer extremities, higher survival rates. Modern sleep science has confirmed what traditional cultures figured out through trial and error. Position matters for thermoregulation. Studies on Arctic researchers and military personnel operating in cold environments show that sleeping at a 30 to 45 degree incline reduces extremity cooling by 15 to 20% compared to sleeping flat, and reduces the energy cost of maintaining core temperature by roughly 10%. Those numbers might not sound dramatic, but over an 8-month winter, that energy savings adds up to thousands of calories, potentially the difference between survival and starvation in pre-industrial times. Your body is figuring all this out right now, adjusting to the sleeping chair, recalibrating circulation patterns, learning new normal. The strange dreams Dmitri warned you about? Those are probably caused by altered blood flow to your brain during sleep. When you're upright, cerebral blood flow patterns change slightly, not dangerously, but enough that your brain might generate weird sensory experiences as it adapts. You're also experiencing something called cold diuresis, which is a fancy term for peeing a lot in cold weather. When your body constricts peripheral blood vessels to preserve core heat, it increases the volume of blood in your core circulation. Your kidneys detect this as excess fluid and start producing more urine to reduce blood volume. So you're getting up multiple times per night to pee, even though you're not drinking that much. It's annoying but normal, another physiological quirk of extreme cold adaptation. Your skin is changing too. The outer layer is becoming drier, thicker, more weathered. This is partly from the cold itself. Low humidity and extreme temperatures damage skin cells, and partly protective adaptation. Thicker skin provides slightly better insulation, and dryness reduces the risk of moisture freezing on the surface. Your face, the only exposed part when you're outside, is probably developing what locals call Arctic leather. Skin that looks tanned and rough, prematurely aged by constant cold exposure. Frostbite is the constant danger, and understanding its physiology helps you avoid it. Frostbite occurs when tissue actually freezes. Ice crystals form in your cells, puncturing cell membranes and causing direct damage. But before that, there's frostnip. Skin gets pale and numb but doesn't freeze. This is reversible if you rewarm quickly. The problem is distinguishing frostnip from early frostbite, because both look and feel similar initially. First-degree frostbite affects surface skin only. It turns white, feels hard, but underlying tissue remains soft. Rewarm it and you get painful tingling, maybe some peeling, but no permanent damage. Second degree creates blisters. Ice crystals have damaged enough cells that fluid accumulates when you rewarm. Third degree goes deeper, freezing muscle and bone, turning tissue black as cells die and blood flow stops permanently. Fourth degree is amputation territory. Everything freezes solid, tissue is non-viable, and you're lucky if you only lose the affected parts. Dimitri's missing 3 fingers from frostbite, and he tells you the story over dinner that night. He was 23, working on a broken-down truck in minus 73 degrees Celsius weather, and he took off his gloves to manipulate a small bolt. Just 30 seconds, he says. I thought 30 seconds, no problem. But bolt was stuck. Took 90 seconds, maybe. When I got it loose and looked at my fingers, they were white like ice. No feeling. I knew immediately. He warmed them slowly. Rapid rewarming causes more damage because ice crystals that have formed in tissue then melt and cause cellular destruction. But the damage was already done. Over the next week, his fingers turned black. Doctors in Yakutsk amputated at the second knuckle of 3 fingers, leaving him with partial hand function but constant reminder of the cold's power. The pain when they were warming, he says, and his eyes go distant. Worse than any pain in my life, like someone filling your fingers with broken glass and fire. I screamed, I cried. I begged them to stop warming them, let them stay frozen. But the medic, she knew better. She kept warming, very slow, very careful. Saved most of my hand. I was lucky. That night, settling into your sleeping chair, you're hyper-aware of your circulation. You can feel your heartbeat in your fingertips, feel the warm blood pulsing through capillaries, feel your body working its metabolic magic to keep you alive at -71 degrees Celsius. The chair doesn't seem so strange anymore. It's a tool like the thermosiphons and the double doors and the running vehicles, a technology developed through generations of trial and error to solve the specific problem of not dying while sleeping. Your legs are slightly elevated on a footrest Dmitri provided, optimizing venous return. Your back is supported at the exact angle that maintains circulation without causing muscle strain. Your head is propped on a cushion that keeps your airways open. Every detail has purpose, and that purpose is survival. Outside, the wind picks up, and you can hear it whistling around the house's stilts, probing for weaknesses, looking for any gap to exploit. The thermosiphons hum their quiet song, pulling heat from the ground and ejecting it into the -71 degrees Celsius night. The wood stove radiates its steady warmth, burning through logs that Dmitri spent the summer cutting and stacking. Everything is working, all the systems harmonizing to create this temporary pocket of warmth and life in an environment fundamentally hostile to both. You sleep, sitting up, and your body does its ancient work, burning fuel, moving blood, maintaining the 37 degrees Celsius that separates you from frozen meat. It's been doing this for every human who's ever lived, but here in Oymyakon, at the edge of habitability, you're aware of it in ways you never were before. Survival isn't passive. It's active, constant, metabolically expensive work that your body performs every second of every day, usually without you noticing. Here, you notice. The market happens on Saturdays, weather permitting, which is a phrase that means something very different in Oymyakon than anywhere else on Earth. Weather permitting doesn't mean if it's not raining. It means if the temperature is above -65 degrees Celsius and the wind isn't strong enough to cause whiteout conditions and the ice road from Yakutsk is still passable and nobody's truck has catastrophically failed in the past week. Given these constraints, the market happens maybe 3 out of 4 Saturdays in winter, and when it does, it's the social event of the week. You wake on Saturday morning, your 5th day in the chair, and your back has stopped complaining quite so loudly, which either means you're adapting or you've damaged something permanently and your nervous system has given up reporting it. To find Dmitri excited in the subdued way Yakutian people express excitement, which is to say he's moving slightly faster than usual and has drunk an extra cup of tea. Market today, he announces. Good day. Only -62 degrees Celsius. Almost warm. Almost warm. You've been here less than a week and you're already starting to think of -62 degrees Celsius as almost warm. This is how hypothermia of the soul begins. The market takes place in the village's largest building, a Soviet-era community center with concrete walls 3 feet thick and a heating system that could warm a small city. Inside, the temperature hovers around 10 degrees Celsius, freezing by normal standards, tropical by local ones. Vendors have set up tables displaying their goods, and goods is a term used loosely because we're talking about a village of 500 people in the middle of frozen nowhere. This isn't a farmer's market in Portland with artisanal sourdough and organic kale. This is a survival exchange where people trade and sell the things they need to not die. The first table you encounter is selling fish. Not fresh fish, that concept doesn't exist here in any meaningful way, but frozen fish in various states of preparation. Whole omul from Lake Baikal, frozen so solid you could build a house with them. Dried fish that looks like brown leather and probably tastes about the same. Salted fish preserved in barrels. Smoked fish that smells incredible even frozen. The vendor is a woman named Katia who spends summers on the Indijurka River catching fish and winters selling them, a cycle that sustained her family for 4 generations. This one good for stroganina, she says, pointing to a frozen omul that's been butterflied and laid flat. You slice thin, eat with salt and bread. This 1 inch, she indicates a larger fish. Good for soup. You put whole thing in pot with water and vegetables, cook 6 hours, makes broth that gives you strength. The fish is priced by weight but also by quality, how recently it was caught, how well it was frozen, how likely it is to be actually edible versus just technically not poisonous. You watch Dmitri negotiate with Katya in a mix of Russian and Saka, a haggling ritual that seems more about social interaction than actual price dispute. Eventually they settle on a price for 3 fish and money changes hands. Actual cash, because credit cards in Oymyakon are about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. The next table has reindeer products. Meat in various cuts, organs, heart, liver, kidneys, all prized for their nutrition density. Fat rendered into blocks that look like white candles, sinew for sewing, antlers for carving, hides for clothing and bedding. The vendor is a man named Nikolai who actually lives out with the herds most of the year, coming to the village only monthly to trade. He smells like smoke and animals and something else, something wild that doesn't quite fit inside a building. Reindeer fat is particularly valued because it remains soft even when frozen, making it useful for cooking and also for waterproofing boots. You rub it into the leather and it creates a barrier against moisture. The meat is lean, almost no marbling, dark red and dense. Reindeer is best meat, Nikolai says with the authority of someone who's eaten almost nothing else for 60 years. Beef is too fat, makes you soft. Reindeer makes you strong, like the deer itself. They survive on nothing, eat lichen and bark, live in cold worse than here. You eat them, you gain their strength. This is folk biology that wouldn't pass muster in an actual biology class, but there's a kernel of truth buried in it. Reindeer meat is extremely high in protein, B vitamins and iron, and relatively low in saturated fat compared to beef. For people living in extreme cold with limited access to diverse food sources, reindeer provides crucial nutrients that prevent deficiency diseases. There's a table selling what passes for fresh vegetables here. Potatoes, onions, carrots, beets, all flown in from Yakutsk and priced accordingly. A kilogram of potatoes costs about 400 rubles, which is roughly $4 but represents a significant portion of the average monthly income in Oymyakon. You watch people carefully selecting individual potatoes, examining them for soft spots or freeze damage, treating each one like the precious resource it is. One vendor has dairy products. Blocks of frozen milk, you literally saw off chunks and melt them, butter, a few wheels of hard cheese that have survived the journey from civilization. Milk in Oymyakon is interesting because you can't really keep cows here, they'd freeze. Some families have a few cows in summer, keeping them in heated barns in winter, but it's labor-intensive and expensive. Most dairy comes from outside, and fresh milk is almost unknown. Instead, you get used to reconstituted powdered milk or frozen blocks that taste slightly off but provide necessary calcium and fat. There's a table that's just stuff. Miscellaneous goods that might have fallen off a truck or been salvaged from abandoned buildings or been inherited from dead relatives. Old Soviet tools, some still functional. Fur hats in various states of wear. A kerosene lamp. Batteries, useless in the cold but people buy them optimistically for summer. A radio from the 1970s that might work. Books in Russian, their pages yellowed and musty. A set of dentures, used? You don't ask. This is the table of last resort, where desperate people sell their possessions and desperate people buy them. Dmitri stops at a table run by an elderly Saka woman selling traditional clothing. Fur boots, mittens with fur lining, hats with ear flaps, parkas made from reindeer hide with intricate embroidery. These aren't cheap tourist reproductions. These are working garments made using techniques that predate the Russian Empire. The stitching is done with reindeer sinew, which is stronger than thread and doesn't rot. The fur is positioned with the hair facing specific directions to maximize warmth and minimize snow accumulation. My grandmother made clothes like this, Dmitri says quietly, running his hand over a parka. She could sew a complete outfit in 3 days, working from sunrise to sunset. Every stitch perfect, every seam waterproof. She said the difference between good sewing and bad sewing was the difference between life and death. So you learned to sew perfectly or you didn't sew at all. The woman selling the clothes is named Sardana, and she's 84 years old with hands so gnarled from arthritis that you wonder how she can still sew. But she does, producing 3 or 4 garments per winter. selling them at prices that don't come close to compensating for the hours of labor but provide her with enough income to supplement her pension. Young people don't want to learn, she says, shaking her head. They want to buy factory clothes from Yakutsk, synthetic materials and zippers. But when zipper breaks in minus 70 degrees Celsius, then what? When synthetic material tears, who will fix it? Traditional clothes, they last 50 years if you care for them. They can be repaired with materials you find in the forest. They are not just clothing, they are survival. Historians still argue whether the younger generation's abandonment of traditional skills represents progress or cultural loss. But standing here in the market, watching Sardana's arthritic hands demonstrate a stitch pattern that's probably 500 years old, you lean toward loss. Some knowledge, once gone, can't be recovered from books or YouTube videos. It requires transmission from hand to hand, master to apprentice, a chain of teaching that breaks as soon as one generation decides the old ways aren't worth learning. There's food being prepared on-site too, which sounds insane until you see the setup. Propane stoves cranked to maximum, boiling water in huge pots, creating pockets of warmth that people cluster around like moths to flame. One vendor is selling buzz, Mongolian-style steamed dumplings filled with mutton and onions, served so hot they burn your mouth and so necessary in this cold that you eat them anyway. Another has soup, a thin broth with chunks of meat and potato that probably contains more grease than is medically advisable but tastes like heaven when your body is burning 3,000 calories a day just existing. You buy buzz from a woman named Olga who's been making them every Saturday for 20 years. She works with bare hands despite the cold. She needs the dexterity for folding the dumplings, and her fingers are pink and slightly swollen from the constant exposure. My hands hurt all the time, she admits cheerfully. But what can you do? Wearing gloves, I can't feel the dough properly. The dumplings come out wrong, so I work barehanded and deal with pain. My daughter says I'm crazy, that I'll lose my fingers like her uncle. Maybe she's right, but for now, fingers still work, dumplings still good. The booze are indeed good, savory and filling, and exactly what your body craves in this environment. You eat 6 of them standing next to Olga's stove, soaking up the heat, watching the social dynamics of the market unfold. Because the market isn't really about commerce, you realize. It's about community. People come here to see each other, exchange news, complain about the cold. Ironically, given that they've chosen to live in literally the coldest inhabited place on Earth. Discuss whose truck broke down, whose relative died, whose child got accepted to university in Yakutsk. In a village this small, in an environment this hostile, isolation is dangerous. The weekly market forces people out of their houses, creates connection, maintains the social bonds that might mean the difference between survival and death when crisis hits. There's an impromptu music session happening in one corner. 2 men with battered guitars and a woman with a komus, a traditional Saka jaw harp that produces this otherworldly buzzing drone. They're playing something that sounds halfway between Russian folk music and Saka traditional songs, and people are listening, tapping their feet, occasionally joining in for the chorus. The music is rougher than anything you'd hear at a concert hall, but it has authenticity that polish often destroys. These are people singing about their lives. The cold, the reindeer, the endless winter, the brief, beautiful summer, the difficulty of everything and the stubborn refusal to give up. One song's chorus, roughly translated, goes, "The cold is long but spring is coming / the night is dark but stars are bright / we sit upright through frozen winter / we'll stand upright when morning comes." Dmitri sings along quietly, and you notice he's got tears in his eyes, though whether from the music or the cold or just general emotion, you can't tell. The market continues for about 3 hours, then people start packing up as the temperature drops and daylight, such as it is, begins to fade. You've spent maybe 2,000 rubles, about $20, on fish, reindeer meat, a loaf of bread, and a small jar of cloudberry jam that the vendor swore was harvested last summer and will cure basically every ailment known to humanity. Whether the jam has actual medicinal properties is debatable, but it tastes incredible, tart and sweet simultaneously, with a flavor that's vaguely like apricots but more complex, more interesting. Walking back to Dimitri's house, your bag heavy with frozen goods, you pass the village's small cemetery. It's on a slight rise, the highest point in the immediate area, and the graves are marked with Orthodox crosses and traditional Saka spirit markers, a synthesis of Russian and indigenous beliefs that characterizes much of Yakutian culture. The frozen ground is too hard to dig for most of the year, so bodies are often kept frozen until summer when burial becomes possible. Death, like everything else here, has to accommodate the cold. Some graves are recent, marked with fresh crosses and photographs of the deceased protected in plastic. Others are old, the wood weathered to gray, the names barely legible. You notice a pattern. Many of the graves are for people who died young. In their 20s, 30s, 40s. The cold takes its toll. Accidents happen. Vehicles break down in storms, people get lost in whiteouts, houses catch fire, and escape becomes impossible through frozen doors. Disease hits harder when the nearest hospital is 3 days' drive away and winter storms can prevent medical evacuation for weeks. My father is there, Dmitri says, pointing to a grave on the eastern edge. Died when I was 12. Heart attack while fixing a truck. Just fell over, gone. Maybe the cold contributed, maybe not. Doctor in Yakutsk said he had bad heart from birth, would have died young anywhere. But I think the cold made it worse. Living here, your heart works harder every day, every hour. It wears out faster. There's no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. Death in Oymyakon isn't a distant possibility, but a constant companion. You make peace with it or you don't make peace, but either way, it's there waiting patiently in the cold. Back at the house, Dmitri unpacks the market purchases, storing the fish and meat outside where they'll remain frozen indefinitely, bringing the bread and jam and vegetables inside where they won't freeze solid. The jam goes into a cupboard, a small luxury to be rationed over the coming weeks. The bread will be eaten tonight, sliced thick and toasted over the stove, spread with butter and that precious jam. Dinner is the market fish prepared as stroganina, frozen almost sliced paper thin with a wickedly sharp knife, arranged on a plate with salt, black pepper, and chunks of black bread. You eat it while it's still frozen, the fish melting slightly on your tongue, the flavor clean and pure and unlike anything you've had before. It's not cooked, barely thawed, and yet it's completely safe because bacteria can't survive the freezing and the fish was caught in clean water and handled properly throughout. This is feast food, Dmitri explains. Special occasions, celebrations, when important guests visit. In old times, you would serve stroganina at weddings, at birth celebrations, at funerals. It shows respect, shows you're giving your best. Also shows you're prosperous enough to have fish to spare. You feel honored and you tell him so. He waves it off, embarrassed by the sentiment, but you can see he's pleased. After dinner, you settle into your sleeping chair, now familiar enough that your body goes through the positioning routine almost automatically. Furs arranged just so, blankets layered precisely, legs elevated, spine supported. You're not comfortable in any conventional sense, but you're warm and safe and alive, which in Oymyakon represents the highest achievement possible. Outside, the wind picks up, and you can hear it screaming across the permafrost, battering the village, testing every building's defenses. The temperature has dropped to minus 73 degrees Celsius, and in Dmitri's house you feel it. The walls creaking, the windows rattling, the cold pressing in despite the insulation and the heating and the desperate human efforts to exclude it. But the sleeping chair holds you upright, your blood keeps circulating, your body keeps burning its fuel, and you drift towards sleep knowing that morning will come, and you'll wake up alive, and that's all anyone can ask for in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. The market proved that life continues here not through individual heroism but through community, trade, shared knowledge, and the stubborn refusal to let the cold win. People help each other because they must, because survival here is a collective effort, because alone you freeze but together you might just make it through another winter. Tomorrow the temperature might drop further. Or it might warm to a balmy minus 55 degrees Celsius. Either way, you'll wake up, eat your enormous breakfast, maintain your borrowed house, and marvel at the fact that humans have chosen to live here generation after generation, when the entire universe seems to be suggesting that maybe they shouldn't. But then, humans have never been particularly good at taking hints from the universe. By your 8th night in Oymyakon, the sleeping chair has become less of a curiosity and more of a necessity you understand in your bones. Literally, since your bones are the structures most invested in maintaining their circulation and warmth. Tonight, Dmitri has invited Yakov and two other village elders over for what he calls history evening, which apparently means sitting around the wood stove drinking vodka, because of course there's vodka. This is Siberia, and telling stories about the old ways, including the specific history and science of upright sleeping. You're about to get the full explanation, passed down through generations, of why you're spending your nights sitting in a chair like some kind of Victorian invalid. The four old men settle into their own chairs. Everyone has sleeping chairs here, you've noticed, even if they also have beds for summer use. And Yakov begins without preamble, speaking in that mix of Russian and Saka that you're starting to understand through context and repetition and possibly mild hypothermia-induced brain alterations. My grandfather, Yakov says. He told me story his grandfather told him, going back maybe 200 years, about a family that froze to death in their sleep. Whole family, mother, father, for children, found in spring when neighbors came to check on them. They were lying down in proper beds, covered with furs. But they were dead, frozen solid. He pauses for effect, taking a sip of vodka that would probably kill a smaller man. The neighbors, they examined the house, tried to understand. The fire had gone out, that was clear. But why didn't the family wake up when it got cold? Why didn't someone revive the fire? The answer, they decided, was the beds. Lying flat, the blood slows in your legs, pools in your core. When the cold comes, it comes from the extremities inward. Your feet freeze, but you're asleep, you don't notice. The cold creeps up your legs, but your brain is in deep sleep, not aware. By the time the cold reaches your core and your brain realizes danger, it's too late. You're too cold to move, too cold to think. You freeze where you lie. This story is probably apocryphal. These teaching through terror tales usually are, but it contains the essential truth that led to upright sleeping as a cultural practice. The vulnerability of deep sleep in extreme cold is real. Your consciousness, that monitoring system that usually keeps you safe, goes offline. And in an environment where conditions can turn lethal in hours, that unconsciousness is dangerous. Another elder, introduced as Mikhail, takes up the thread. The Saka people who came here, they brought tradition of sleeping sitting up from the Mongolian steppes, but for different reasons. On the steppes, you sat upright to watch for enemies, for wolves, for storms. Here, the enemy is the cold. But the solution is the same. Stay upright, stay half-aware, stay alive. He's partially right. Anthropological research into sleeping positions across cultures shows that upright sleeping has appeared independently in multiple cold climate populations. The Sami in northern Scandinavia, some Inuit groups in Arctic Canada, various Siberian peoples, and even peasant populations in medieval Scandinavia. The common thread is extreme cold combined with unreliable heating. When you can't guarantee your environment will stay warm through the night, sleeping in a position that maintains circulation and permits rapid waking becomes adaptive. But there is science also, says the third elder, Victor, who apparently studied medicine in Yakutsk before returning to Oymyakon in the 1970s. When you lie flat, the heart must pump blood horizontally to your brain, horizontally to your feet. No help from gravity. In warm conditions, this is fine. In extreme cold, the heart is already working harder, maybe 20% harder than normal, just to maintain core temperature. Adding the extra work of fighting gravity to circulate blood, over 8 hours of sleep, this exhausts the cardiovascular system. He's describing what cardiologists call orthostatic stress, though from the opposite direction than usually discussed. Normally, orthostatic stress refers to the challenge of standing up. Gravity pulls blood away from your brain, causing lightheadedness. But Victor is talking about the horizontal challenge. When lying flat in extreme cold, your heart works harder to push blood through constricted peripheral vessels against the resistance of a horizontal plane. When you sit upright, Victor continues, warming to his topic, gravity helps return blood from legs and feet to the heart. The venous return is passive, efficient. The heart doesn't work as hard. Over 8 hours, this saves maybe, he pauses, calculating, maybe 15,000 to 20,000 heartbeats. 15,000 times your heart doesn't have to work as hard. This adds up. The math is approximate, but the principle is sound. Your cardiovascular system in extreme cold is already stressed. Anything that reduces that stress increases your chances of survival. Upright sleeping reduces cardiac workload during the vulnerable sleep period. Dmitri refills everyone's vodka glasses, And Yakov continues. There is also the blood thickness problem. Very cold weather makes blood more viscous, thicker, harder to pump. This is known. Medical study from Soviet times proved it. When blood is thick and heart is already working hard and you're lying flat, the combination can be dangerous, especially for older people or people with heart problems. He's referring to research done in the 1960s and 70s by Soviet scientists studying Arctic populations. They found that prolonged exposure to extreme cold increases blood viscosity through several mechanisms. Dehydration, people drink less when water is inconvenient to access and prepare. Increased red blood cell production, the body's attempt to maximize oxygen transport, and increased fibrinogen levels, a clotting factor that rises in cold stress. Thicker blood is harder to pump, increasing cardiac workload and potentially contributing to heart attacks and strokes, both of which are elevated in extreme cold climates. My uncle died in his sleep, Victor says quietly. Heart attack, age 53. But he was sleeping in a bed, lying flat, Western style. He thought the old ways were superstition. His wife found him in the morning, cold and dead. Doctor said heart attack, and yes, his heart stopped. But why that night? Why that particular night after 53 years? I think the position, the lying flat, the extra strain on his heart. I think this contributed. The room falls silent for a moment, honoring the memory of Victor's uncle and the countless others who've died in their sleep in Oymyakon over the centuries. Death here is common enough to be familiar, but never quite common enough to lose its sting. Mikhail breaks the silence. The sitting position also keeps the airways open. When you lie flat on your back, sometimes the tongue falls backward, blocks the throat partially. This is why people snore. In extreme cold, with more mucus production from breathing cold air, with swelling in the throat from temperature stress, this blockage can become dangerous. You're not getting enough oxygen, but you're asleep, you don't know. Sitting up keeps everything open, keeps you breathing properly. This is basically a description of position-related sleep apnea, and he's absolutely right. Supine sleeping, lying on your back, increases the risk of airway obstruction. In temperate climates, this is merely annoying, snoring, poor sleep quality, possibly long-term health effects. In extreme cold, where your body needs maximum oxygen to fuel thermogenesis, poor oxygenation during sleep can be genuinely dangerous. There is one more thing, Yakov says, leaning forward, and his tone suggests this is the real secret, the deep knowledge. When you sleep sitting up, you sleep lighter. Not deep sleep like lying down. You stay in, he searches for the words. In the upper levels of sleep, you can wake quickly if something is wrong. Fire dying, cold penetrating, sounds outside that mean danger. He's describing what sleep researchers call reduced sleep depth or increased sleep fragmentation. In studies of people sleeping in threatening environments, soldiers in combat zones, parents of newborns, people with anxiety disorders, sleep architecture shifts toward lighter stages. You spend less time in deep slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, more time in the lighter N1 and N2 stages where external stimuli can wake you more easily. From a survival perspective, this is adaptive. Deep sleep is restorative but dangerous when your environment is hostile. Light sleep is less restorative but permits rapid response to threats. In Oymyakon, where the primary threat is the cold and the secondary threat is heating system failure, maintaining the ability to wake quickly and respond to temperature drops is literally life-saving. But this means, Victor adds, that people here don't sleep as well as people in warm places. We wake more often, sleep less deeply, don't feel as rested. This contributes to health problems, to shorter lifespans. The sitting position keeps us alive through each night, but over a lifetime, the poor sleep quality takes its toll. This is the trade-off, the hidden cost of adaptation. Upright sleeping in extreme cold solves the immediate problem, not freezing to death in your sleep, but creates a chronic problem. Insufficient deep sleep leads to cognitive impairment, weakened immune function, cardiovascular stress, metabolic dysregulation. Over decades, this accumulates. Studies of traditional Arctic populations show higher rates of certain diseases: cardiovascular disease, respiratory problems, depression. Some of this is attributable to diet, some to extreme cold exposure, some to the social stresses of isolated communities. But sleep deprivation is likely a contributing factor. one that's rarely discussed because it's so normalized that nobody thinks to question it. Dmitry speaks up for the first time in a while. When I visited my cousin in Moscow, he has proper bed, lying flat. I tried to sleep in it. Couldn't do it. Felt wrong, felt vulnerable. I kept waking up, feeling like something bad was about to happen. After 3 nights, I asked for a chair. He thought I was crazy, but in the chair I slept fine. My body knows what it needs. This is the embodied knowledge that's hard to quantify but impossible to dismiss. After a lifetime of upright sleeping, Dmitry's nervous system has been trained to recognize supine sleeping as dangerous. His stress response activates when he lies flat because lying flat, in his experiential learning, is associated with vulnerability. The position itself triggers anxiety that prevents sleep. The question, Mikhail says philosophically, vodka making him expansive, is whether we adapted to the cold or the cold adapted us. Did we choose to sit upright or did the cold force us to, and we just told ourselves it was choice? Is this evolution or is this survival? Historians still argue this question in various forms. Are cultural practices adaptations, conscious solutions to identified problems, or evolutions, gradual shifts driven by differential survival? The truth is probably both. Some ancestor probably noticed that people who slept sitting up survived cold nights more often than people who slept lying down. That observation became a recommendation, the recommendation became a practice, the practice became a tradition, and the tradition became so ingrained that its original purpose was half forgotten, transformed into folklore and superstition, and this is how we've always done it. But the practice persists because it works. Natural selection operates on cultural practices just as it operates on genetic traits. Practices that increase survival get passed down. Practices that decrease survival get abandoned, along with the people who practice them. Upright sleeping in extreme cold increased survival, so it persisted, and here you are, 8 nights into your Oymyakon experience, sitting in a chair at minus 71 degrees Celsius, participating in a survival strategy that's possibly thousands of years old. Victor pours another round of vodka. You've lost count of how many you've had, which is probably for the best, and raises his glass. To the sleeping chair, he says. It is uncomfortable, it is strange to outsiders. It gives us back pain and strange dreams. But it has kept the Saka people alive through winters that would kill anyone else. It is technology, same as the thermosiphon and the stilt foundation. Old technology, yes. Simple technology. But it works. Everyone drinks, and the vodka burns down your throat and settles warm in your stomach, adding its own contribution to your internal furnace. You're drunk enough to feel sentimental about a piece of furniture, drunk enough to feel profound gratitude toward centuries of unknown Yakutian ancestors who figured out through trial and error and probably numerous frozen corpses that sleeping upright was better than sleeping flat when the temperature wanted to kill you. The evening continues with more stories, more vodka, more collective knowledge shared around the stove. Someone mentions that the Inuit have a similar practice in the coldest months, sleeping propped against walls or in seated positions in their igloos. Someone else talks about Norwegian fishermen who would sleep sitting up in their boats during winter expeditions. The pattern repeats across cultures and continents. When it's cold enough, when heating is uncertain enough, when survival margins are thin enough, humans sit up to sleep. Eventually the elders depart, bundling into their furs and stepping out into the minus 71 degrees Celsius night, walking the short distances to their own homes with the careful steps of people who've navigated this environment for decades. You help Dmitry clean up, washing glasses in water that's too precious to waste on proper rinsing, storing the vodka bottle, still half full, because these men have practiced their alcohol tolerance as carefully as they've practiced their cold tolerance. And then it's time for sleep, and you settle into your chair with new understanding. This isn't just a chair. It's a survival technology refined over centuries, an embodied solution to a specific environmental challenge, a piece of material culture that carries within it the accumulated wisdom of countless cold nights and careful observations and people who died so their descendants could learn what not to do. Your blood circulates efficiently from core to extremities and back again, assisted by gravity, your heart working hard but not impossibly hard. Your airways remain open, your breathing unobstructed. Your consciousness hovers in those light sleep stages where you remain semi-aware of your environment, ready to wake if the fire dies or the temperature drops or anything goes wrong. It's not comfortable. Your back will hurt tomorrow. Your neck will be stiff. You'll wake multiple times through the night because light sleep is fragmented sleep. But you'll wake up alive, and in Oymyakon at minus 71 degrees Celsius, that's the only metric that matters. The sleeping chair has kept people alive for generations. Tonight, it's keeping you alive too. And somewhere in your vodka-soaked, cold-adapted, semi-hypothermic brain, you understand that this is beautiful. Humans refusing to accept the universe's judgment that they can't live here, engineering their way to survival one innovation at a time, including the innovation of sleeping in a position that every comfortable instinct says is wrong. Outside, the stars whisper their icy secrets to the frozen earth. Inside, you sit upright and survive another night. By the end of your second week in Oymyakon, you've become something you never expected, a temporary local. You know the rhythm of the place, the unspoken rules, the small gestures that mean the difference between acceptance and permanent outsider status. You've learned to nod at people you pass on the street, to accept tea when offered always, to never ask someone to step outside for just a minute, because there's no such thing as just a minute at minus 70 degrees Celsius. You either commit to being outside properly equipped or you stay inside. You've learned that the old woman who runs the tiny store is named Galina, and she's been keeping track of your purchases with the attentiveness of someone who has nothing better to do than monitor the consumption patterns of 500 people. You've learned that the mechanic Sergei can fix literally anything given enough vodka and sufficient motivation, and that motivation usually comes in the form of flattery about his skills. More importantly, you've learned that modern life in Oymyakon is a fascinating collision between ancient survival wisdom and contemporary technology, where people check weather apps on smartphones while wearing reindeer skin boots their grandmothers made, where teenagers post TikTok videos of frozen hair challenges while their parents teach them how to butcher caribou in the traditional way. This morning, Dmitri's neighbor Alexei, a man in his early 30s with a degree in computer science from Moscow State University who returned to Oymyakon because, as he put it, Moscow makes your soul sick but Oymyakon just tries to kill your body, and I prefer the honest enemy, has invited you to see his setup. He runs a small internet service provider business, maintaining satellite connections for the village and offering tech support to the handful of residents who own computers. His house is almost identical to Dmitri's on the outside. Stilts, thick walls, the whole 9 yards of permafrost architecture. Inside, though, it's a different world. Multiple computers are running, their fans humming, their heat actually contributing meaningfully to warming the room. Servers sit on a desk jury-rigged from Soviet-era furniture, connected to a satellite dish outside through cables that have been specially insulated against the cold. The regular kind freeze and crack. Alexei uses Arctic-rated cables designed for offshore oil platforms. Internet in Oymyakon is complicated, he says, gesturing at his setup with the pride of someone who solved an impossible problem through sheer stubbornness. Satellite only, obviously. No way to run fiber out here, and even if you could, maintaining it in permafrost would be nightmare. Latency is terrible, 500 milliseconds on a good day, worse when weather is bad. But it works. People can check email, watch YouTube videos if they're patient, stay connected to the world. He shows you the challenges. Keeping electronics warm enough to function, most computers have problems below 0 degrees Celsius. Protecting equipment from the massive temperature swings when you bring something inside from outside, condensation forms instantly and fries circuits if you're not careful. Dealing with power fluctuations from the village's diesel generators. His servers are wrapped in insulation and have small heating elements to maintain operating temperature. His backup drives are kept in an insulated box with a light bulb for warmth. The real problem, Alexei explains, is that every piece of modern technology assumes you're operating in what they call normal environmental conditions, which means roughly 0 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius. We're so far outside normal that half the devices just give up. Batteries are worst. Lithium-ion batteries lose 80% of their capacity below minus 20 degrees Celsius. At minus 70 degrees Celsius, they're basically decorative. Phones die in your pocket. Cameras stop working mid-shot. Drone operators from outside who come here, they crash their drones constantly because the batteries die with zero warning. He pulls out his phone, a rugged model designed for industrial use, one of the few that maintains function in extreme cold. This cost me 60,000 rubles. Normal smartphone costs maybe 20,000. But normal smartphone is useless here. shuts down the moment you step outside. This one, it works down to minus 50 degrees Celsius. And below that I keep it in an insulated pouch against my body. Battery still drains fast, but at least it functions. You've noticed that young people in Oymyakon are constantly connected despite the challenges. In the cafe, which is really just someone's living room where they sell tea and pastries, teenagers cluster around the single power outlet, charging their phones, watching videos, scrolling through social media. They're simultaneously living in the coldest inhabited place on Earth and participating in global digital culture. They watch the same TikToks as kids in California, listen to the same music as teenagers in Tokyo, play the same mobile games, albeit with frustrating lag and frequent disconnections. My daughter, Dimitri mentioned yesterday, she wants to be influencer, has channel on YouTube where she posts videos about life here. Extreme cold living, she calls it. Has maybe 10,000 subscribers, people from all over world who cannot believe anyone lives like this. She makes small amount of money from advertising, not much but something. Modern way of living. You looked up her channel last night, during one of the internet's functional periods. It's actually quite good. Professionally edited videos showing daily life in Oymyakon. From starting frozen cars to preparing stroganina to demonstrating proper winter clothing layering. The comments are a mix of fascination. I can't believe people actually live there. Skepticism, this must be fake. And envy, so peaceful, no modern stress. The envy comments are particularly ironic to anyone who's actually experienced the stress of wondering whether your heating system will fail overnight. Alexei shows you something else. A small weather station he's built, sensors deployed around his property feeding data to a database that he shares with the village. Temperature, wind speed, barometric pressure, humidity, all measured and recorded continuously. Weather here is killer, he says, and he means it literally. You need to know what's coming. Storms can arrive with almost no warning. Temperature can drop 20 degrees in an hour. Having data helps people prepare. The weather data feeds into a simple website he maintains, Oymyakon Weathered Are You, that displays current conditions and a rough forecast based on satellite data. It's primitive by modern standards but invaluable here. School administrators check it to decide whether to close. Herders check it to know if they need to bring their animals to shelter. Drivers check it before attempting the road to Yakutsk. I tried to get government grant to improve system, Alexei says, but they said impact is too small. Only 500 people benefit. Not worth investment. So I maintain it myself, update the code when I can, add features slowly. Is like everything here. If you want something done, you do it yourself or it doesn't get done. This self-reliance is a thread running through every conversation you've had in Oymyakon. Government support exists but is minimal, subsidies for living in extreme climate zones, some infrastructure maintenance, the school and health clinic. Everything else is DIY or it doesn't happen. Want internet? Build it yourself. Want fresh vegetables? Grow them in summer and preserve them or pay through the nose to import them. Want entertainment? Create it yourself through community gatherings and music and storytelling. The isolation that the internet theoretically solves remains real in most practical ways. Medical emergencies requiring hospital care mean a flight to Yakutsk if weather permits or a 3-day drive if it doesn't. Ordering products online is possible, but shipping costs are astronomical and delivery times are measured in weeks or months. Amazon Prime's 2-day shipping has no power here. Yet the connection the internet provides is genuine and valued. Alexei shows you a video chat happening on one of his computers. A grandmother in Oymyakon talking to her grandson in St. Petersburg, showing him the cold through her window, him showing her his apartment and his new girlfriend. The 8,000-kilometer distance is bridged by satellite uplink and stubborn technology, making isolation just slightly more bearable. People ask me why I came back from Moscow, Alexei says. I had good job, good salary, apartment in decent neighborhood. But Moscow is crushing. Too many people, too much noise, too much corruption and competition and stress. Here, yes, the cold tries to kill you, but the cold is honest. It doesn't lie or cheat or manipulate. It just is. You respect it and prepare for it, and sometimes you still get hurt, but at least you know what you're dealing with. This theme, the honesty of the cold, comes up repeatedly in conversations with people who've left and returned. The modern world is complicated, full of invisible threats and social competition and systems you can't control. The cold is simple. Prepare properly or die. Maintain your systems or freeze. Help your neighbors or everyone suffers. The cause and effect is direct and unambiguous. Later that day, you visit the school, which is a revelation in its ordinariness. 60 students ranging from 1st grade through 11th grade, taught by 8 teachers in a building that's warm and bright and filled with the same educational posters you'd see in schools anywhere. Periodic table, world map, grammar rules. The difference is in the details. The airlock entrance where students shed their outdoor gear, the heated cubbies for boots, the strict rules about no one going outside alone during breaks, the thermometer checking ritual every morning to determine whether it's a school day. The principal, a woman named Irina who moved here from Irkutsk 15 years ago for reasons she describes as complicated and involving a man who turned out to be less wonderful than advertised, shows you around with obvious pride. Our students do well, she says. Test scores are above regional average. We send kids to university in Yakutsk, Moscow, even some international schools. The isolation forces them to be self-directed learners. Internet access is limited, library is small, so they learn to find information creatively, to think independently. She shows you the computer room, 5 computers that look ancient but function, connected to Alexei's internet when it's working. Students here grow up with interesting combination of traditional knowledge and modern skills. Irina explains. They can butcher reindeer and code in Python. They know which plants are edible in summer and how to edit videos for YouTube. It's strange synthesis, but it works. In one classroom, a teacher is explaining photosynthesis to a group of middle schoolers who, for most of the year, barely see the sun. The irony isn't lost on anyone. In another room, students are learning traditional Saka songs, preserving cultural knowledge that's slowly eroding. The school is fighting a two-front war, preparing students for modern world while trying to maintain cultural continuity. It's unclear whether they're winning on either front. You talk to some of the students during lunch, a hot meal provided by the school because for some families, this is the most reliable nutrition their children receive. A 15-year-old girl named Christina tells you about her plans. I want to study environmental science, maybe help develop better building techniques for permafrost regions. There's so much potential here: geothermal energy, improved insulation materials, sustainable architecture. But to study these things, I have to leave. Go to Yakutsk or Moscow. Maybe I'll come back, maybe not. Depends if there are jobs here doing what I want to do. This is the central dilemma facing every young person in Oymyakon. Leave to pursue education and opportunity, or stay to maintain community and tradition. Most leave. Few return. The village is slowly bleeding its young people, its future, while the old ways and old people remain, growing older, their knowledge less and less relevant in a world that's moving on. A 16-year-old boy named Anton has different plans. I'm learning to be mechanic like my father. We'll take over his business when he retires. Someone has to keep the vehicles running, and it's skilled work that pays decently. Plus, I like it here. In cities, you're nobody. Here, everyone knows you, everyone depends on you. That matters. That evening, back at Dimitri's house, you scroll through social media on your borrowed phone during one of the internet's functional windows. Your previous life feels distant, almost fictional. Complaints about traffic and work stress and relationship drama and all the problems that seemed so important when you were living them. Here, those concerns are irrelevant. Here, the question every day is simpler. Will I survive today? Will my house stay warm? Will my vehicle start? Will I wake up tomorrow? It's reductive, but there's something almost peaceful about it. The cold strips away everything non-essential, leaving only what truly matters: warmth, food, community, survival. Whether this simplification is profound or just Stockholm Syndrome is hard to say. Dimitri is preparing dinner. Reindeer stew again, because reindeer is what you eat here unless you're wealthy enough to afford imported alternatives. And he's humming tunelessly while he works. His smartphone sits on the counter, fully charged, playing music through a Bluetooth speaker that seems absurdly high-tech in this context. The song is American pop, something about summer and beaches and dancing, utterly disconnected from the minus 72 degrees Celsius reality outside. Is strange, yes, Dmitri says, catching your expression. We live in coldest place on earth but listen to songs about summer. We drive Soviet-era trucks but use GPS navigation. We sleep in chairs like our ancestors but order supplies on internet. Modern and traditional all mixed together. This is Yakutia. This is how we survive, taking best from both worlds. Tonight you'll sleep upright again, your body now so accustomed to the position that lying flat would feel wrong. Your smartphone will charge next to you, maintaining connection to a digital world that exists in servers thousands of kilometers away, while your physical body exists in the most extreme inhabited environment on Earth. Tomorrow, Dmitri has promised to take you ice fishing, which involves drilling through 2 meters of ice to reach water that remains liquid only because it's deep enough that pressure and slight geothermal activity prevent freezing. You'll catch fish that were swimming in near-freezing water and watch them freeze solid in the minus 70 degrees Celsius air in approximately 90 seconds. And then you'll eat them as stroganina, this ancient preparation method, while checking your email on a smartphone. Modern life meets ancient cold, and somehow, impossibly, both survive. Your last full day in Oymyakon arrives with the same brutal cold that greeted every previous morning. But something has shifted inside you. The temperature is minus 69 degrees Celsius, practically balmy by local standards, and when you step outside to help Dmitri with his morning vehicle check, you notice you're not quite as shocked by it anymore. Your body has started adapting in small ways. You shiver less, your breathing has adjusted to the scarf-filtered air, your fingers and toes don't go numb quite as quickly. You're nowhere near native-level cold tolerance, but you're also no longer the helpless outsider who could barely function in these conditions. This adaptation is both physiological and psychological. Your brown fat deposits have likely increased slightly. Your peripheral circulation has improved its cold-induced vasodilation response. Your metabolism has upregulated. But more significantly, your brain has recategorized the cold from emergency threat to challenging but manageable environment. Fear burns calories. Acceptance conserves them. Your nervous system has learned that minus 70 degrees Celsius is survivable with proper precautions, so it stopped treating every moment outside as a crisis. Dmitri notices the change. You move differently now, he observes while checking his truck's tire pressure. A largely futile exercise at these temperatures, but routine is routine. More confident, less afraid. Good. Fear in cold is dangerous. Makes you tense, makes you use more energy, makes you make mistakes. Calm is better. Respect the cold, but don't fear it. The ice fishing expedition begins after breakfast, the usual enormous meal that your body now craves rather than protests. You're eating 3,500 to 4,000 calories daily and maintaining weight, possibly even losing a bit because your metabolism is running so hot. Your body has become a furnace and food is fuel, and you shovel it in with the mechanical efficiency of someone feeding a machine. The fishing spot is about 5 kilometers from the village, accessible by truck over a route that would generously be called a road, but is really just packed snow with tire ruts frozen into it. The landscape is otherworldly in its starkness. White ground, white sky, the two barely distinguishable at the horizon. A few scraggly trees, Siberian larch, one of the only species that can survive here, stand like black brushstrokes against the white canvas. The sun is making its brief appearance, a weak disk that provides light but no warmth, hovering just above the southern horizon. The fishing hole from last week has frozen over, of course, so Dmitri breaks out the ice auger, a hand-crank drill designed to penetrate meters of ice. This is brutal work even in moderate cold. At minus 69 degrees Celsius, it's a test of endurance and determination. He drills down, the auger biting into ice that's so hard it's basically rock, ice that's been accumulating and compressing for months. Shavings spiral up and out, creating a small mountain of ice chips around the hole. After 20 minutes of steady drilling, the auger suddenly drops. He's broken through to water. 2 meters of solid ice, now with a hole roughly 20 centimeters in diameter providing access to the dark water below. The water, technically above freezing at maybe 2 degrees Celsius or 3 degrees Celsius, steams when it meets the minus 69 degrees Celsius air. The temperature differential is so extreme that ice immediately begins forming around the edges of the hole, trying to seal it closed again. Dmitry uses a scoop to clear the forming ice, maintaining the opening. Fishing in these conditions is meditative. You can't fish the way you would in temperate climates. Sitting on a riverbank, relaxing, waiting patiently. Here, you're actively managing the cold. Keeping the hole clear, keeping your hands functional, keeping your core temperature stable. Dmitry uses a simple handline rather than a rod, less equipment to freeze and malfunction. The bait is frozen fish because everything is frozen, and somehow the fish below don't seem to mind. The first bite comes quickly. Something pulls at the line, and Dmitry hauls it up with practiced efficiency. A omel, maybe 40 centimeters long, silvery and beautiful in the weak sunlight. The moment it leaves the water, ice begins forming on its scales. Within 30 seconds, it's rigid. Within 2 minutes, it's frozen solid, a fish-shaped piece of ice that will remain perfectly preserved until someone decides to eat it. This is how we stored food for thousands of years, Dmitry says, adding the fish to a growing pile. No refrigerators, no freezers, just winter. Nature provides cold storage for free, 9 months per year. In summer, more difficult, we smoke fish, dry fish, salt fish. But winter, just leave outside. Stays perfect. You try your hand at fishing and manage to catch 2 smaller fish, both of which undergo the same instant freeze transformation. It's surreal watching a living creature become a solid object in real time, the cold working so fast that there's no gradual transition. One moment, alive, swimming, fluid. Next moment, dead, frozen, solid. While you fish, Dmitry talks about the future, or rather the lack of certainty about it. Village is shrinking, he says, stating what everyone knows but doesn't always acknowledge. My generation, we stay because this is home, we know nothing else. Young people, they have options we didn't have. Internet shows them the world. Education gives them skills for other places. Why would they stay here where life is hard and opportunities few? He's quiet for a moment, clearing ice from the fishing hole, then continues. In 30 years, maybe Oymyakon is gone, empty, just ghost town with empty houses sinking into melting permafrost. Or maybe not. Maybe some people always stay, maybe new people come looking for, I don't know, authenticity, escape from modern world. Hard to predict. This uncertainty hangs over everything in Oymyakon. The village exists in a liminal state between past and future, between tradition and modernity, between viable community and inevitable abandonment. Climate change adds another layer of unpredictability. Some models suggest Yakutia will warm significantly over coming decades, potentially making places like Oymyakon less extreme. Other models predict more volatile weather, more extreme temperature swings, possibly making life here even harder. Permafrost is already changing, Dmitry says. Buildings that were stable for 50 years suddenly developing cracks, settling unevenly. Some scientists say permafrost will be gone in 100 years. All melted. I don't know if true, but I know things are different than when I was child. Winters may be slightly warmer, summers definitely warmer. Ice roads used to be reliable from October to April. Now, sometimes they don't freeze solid until November, melt in March. Small changes, but they add up. The conversation is interrupted by another bite. A larger fish, maybe 50 centimeters, that puts up enough fight that Dmitry actually has to work to bring it up. When it emerges, it's a pike, all teeth and predatory angles, freezing into a position that makes it look like a trophy mounted on a wall. Good eating, Dmitry says approvingly. Pike makes excellent soup. You fish for another hour, catching enough for several meals, then pack up before the cold becomes genuinely dangerous. Even with all your precautions and adaptations, extended exposure at minus 69 degrees Celsius is risky. Your fingers are numb inside 3 layers of gloves. Your toes are starting to lose sensation in their reindeer skin boots. Your face, exposed except for your eyes, is painful from the cold. The drive back to the village is quiet, the truck's heater fighting a losing battle against the temperature but providing enough warmth to prevent actual frostbite. You pass the cemetery again, and this time you notice something you missed before. Recent graves, very recent, the earth still dark where it was excavated last summer. The newest grave has a date from just 3 months ago, November 2025. Someone died and was kept frozen until the ground softened enough for burial. Death here is patient, waiting for the right season. Back at the village, you help Dimitri store the fish, adding them to the outdoor pile where they'll remain frozen and fresh indefinitely. Then retreat inside for the slow warming process. Your body temperature has dropped during the fishing expedition, not dangerously but noticeably. It takes an hour of sitting near the stove, drinking hot tea, eating high-calorie snacks, before you feel genuinely warm again. That evening, your last evening, several neighbors gather at Dimitri's house for an informal farewell. There's food stroganina from the morning's catch, reindeer prepared 3 different ways, bread, preserved vegetables from summer, that precious cloudberry jam. There's vodka, naturally, and tea, and conversation that flows between Russian and Saka and occasionally English when people want to include you directly. Yakov tells a story about the winter of 1982 when temperatures dropped to minus 77 degrees Celsius for 3 consecutive days, and the entire village essentially hibernated indoors, burning through with supplies at unsustainable rates, rationing food because nobody could get to the store. "We survived," he says, "because everyone helped everyone. One family's stove broke. They moved in with neighbors. Another family ran out of food. We shared what we had. Soviet system was many bad things, but it taught us collective responsibility. We still have that even now." Valentina from the museum talks about cultural preservation, about the losing battle to maintain Saka language and traditions when Russian is the language of success and traditional skills aren't valued in modern economy. "I teach language classes to children," she says. "Maybe 10 students come. Their parents speak Russian at home because they think it will help their children succeed. Maybe they're right, but something is lost." Alexei talks about his internet service and his hopes for improved connectivity, maybe even satellite broadband that could make remote work viable in Oymyakon. "If people can work for Moscow companies while living here, maybe some will stay," he says. Digital nomads choosing extreme cold over crowded city. Seems crazy, but so does living here at all, and people do. The conversation eventually turns to you, what you've learned, what you'll take home, what you think about their village and their lives. You try to articulate something meaningful but struggle, because how do you summarize 2 weeks of the most extreme environment you've ever experienced? How do you explain that you came here as a curiosity seeker but you're leaving with profound respect for people who've made a home in a place that seems fundamentally inhospitable to human life? "You'll sleep different when you go home," Dimitri predicts. "For a while, maybe weeks, you'll wake up in your bed and feel wrong. Too horizontal, too warm, too soft. Your body has learned new patterns. It will take time to unlearn them." He's probably right. Your body has adapted to upright sleeping, to extreme cold, to constant vigilance. These adaptations won't vanish the moment you return to a temperate climate and a normal bed. You'll carry Oymyakon with you, in your muscle memory and your nervous system and your revised understanding of what humans can endure. As the evening winds down and neighbors depart into the minus 71 degrees Celsius night, you settle into your sleeping chair one last time. Tomorrow you'll begin the long journey back. Truck to Yakutsk, plane to Moscow, another plane to wherever you call home. Back to a world where minus 5 degrees Celsius is considered cold, where sleeping in a bed is normal, where survival isn't a daily negotiation with hostile environment. But tonight, you're still here, still sitting upright, still feeling your blood circulate efficiently through your veins, still marveling at the fact that humans have chosen to live in this place, generation after generation, despite everything. The wood stove radiates its steady heat. Outside, the temperature continues its nightly descent, probably heading toward minus 75 degrees Celsius or worse. The stars are brilliant, visible through the window's triple-glazed ice-covered glass. The same stars that shine over tropical beaches and European cities and everywhere else humans have decided to make their homes. You think about the sleeping chair, this simple piece of technology that represents centuries of accumulated wisdom. You think about all the other small adaptations, the thermosiphons, the elevated pipes, the airlock doors, the running vehicles, each one solving a specific problem, together creating the possibility of life in impossible conditions. And you think about the people, Dmitri with his missing fingers and his cheerful acceptance of hardship, Yakov building his traditional balagan to preserve knowledge that's fading, Valentina fighting to maintain a language that's dying, Alexei bringing internet to the edge of the world, the school children learning Python and reindeer butchering in equal measure. They're not heroes in any conventional sense. They're just people who've refused to accept that they can't live where they want to live, who've looked at minus 71 degrees Celsius and said, we can make this work, and then did the hard, unglamorous, daily work of making it work. Your last night in Oymyakon, you sleep deeply despite the upright position, your body finally fully adapted to this strange practice. You dream of cold and warmth, of ancient traditions and modern technology, of the thin line between survival and death that everyone here walks every single day. When morning comes, your last Oymyakon morning, you'll wake up alive, which is all anyone can ask for in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. And you'll carry that lesson home. Survival isn't heroic or dramatic. It's a series of small, careful choices, made over and over, day after day, night after night. It's sleeping upright to keep the blood circulating. It's checking the thermosiphons. It's helping your neighbors. It's respecting the cold without fearing it. It's being human in a place that seems to suggest humans shouldn't be. And doing it anyway. The stars outside are beginning to fade now, not because dawn is coming. There are still hours before the sun makes its brief appearance, but because your eyes are growing heavy, your breathing is slowing, your body is settling into that familiar restful state that no longer feels strange or wrong. You're sitting upright in your chair, wrapped in furs and blankets, warm and safe inside Dmitri's house while the cold presses against the walls, patient and eternal. Tomorrow the temperature might drop further or it might warm slightly. Tomorrow you might see the aurora dancing green across the sky or just endless darkness punctuated by stars. Tomorrow you'll begin your journey home, but for now, for these last precious hours, you're here, you're part of this place, you're living the way humans have lived in Yakutia for hundreds of years. Your heartbeat is steady, your blood flowing easily through vessels that have learned to manage extreme cold. Your body working its quiet miracles of thermoregulation and adaptation. Outside, the wind whispers across the permafrost, ancient and indifferent. Inside, the wood stove radiates gentle warmth, human technology holding back the cosmic cold for another night. Let your shoulders relax now. Let your breathing deepen. Let the weight of all you've learned and experienced settle into your bones like snowfall accumulating on frozen ground. The sleeping chair holds you safely upright, this centuries-old technology keeping you warm and alive and comfortable in its own unique way. Your circulation continues its endless work, blood flowing from heart to extremities and back again, assisted by gravity, sustained by warmth, maintaining the delicate balance that separates life from frozen stillness. Sleep now, sitting up like generations before you, knowing that morning will come, that you'll wake up alive, that you've survived another night in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. The cold is long, but you are warm. The night is dark, but you are safe. Sleep well.